Welcome to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name's Jared Mello, and I'm the Shepherd of Black Sheep. I got a few announcements today before we begin. First one is, I got my Facebook back again for now. So fingers crossed that I can keep that safe and unhacked. I still have one more thing to confirm, but that's pretty good. I'm glad that I got that back. But I also learned something in the process too. I always try to see as life happening for me, not to me. And what I realized was I was wasting too much time on Facebook that wasn't productive. And I think time spent for me on YouTube is more productive than time spent on Facebook. It can get tricky because I have a lot of followers on Facebook. I have 197,000 people following me there. But in terms of financial success, it doesn't really do as much for that. So I realized it's actually kind of just more of a self-esteem boost. And that's sneaky because that can kind of be more like a drug. So that's what I've learned from the situation so far. And I learned about how to protect myself and to not fall for stupid things like I did. So that was pretty cool. Actually, I shouldn't say it was pretty cool, but I'm glad I got it back, and fingers crossed things continue to go well. The second announcement is I interviewed Connor Beaton today from Man Talks. He's Man Talks on YouTube and he's Man Talks on Instagram. We talked about a lot of men's issues, masculine energy, feminine energy, the things that he sees guys struggling with, the dating market. Can people date across the political spectrum? Can conservatives date liberals? Can progressives date Republicans? I mean, we went over all that, which was pretty cool. And just other issues that men seem to be having. And I'll probably be uploading that tomorrow. Now, today, what I'll be going over is a video from Brian Netton, a video from Ashley Manfield, and then Law and Crime Network have a couple videos about this topic as well. And our friend, who I'm going to invite on the channel, our friend Maureen O'Connell, she's the former FBI agent that Brian Netton always talks to. She's on my page with this, if you listen to this video, which is pretty cool. Jimmy, welcome back, Jimmy. Took a couple nights off on us. Sally, welcome. Peg, welcome. Wes, welcome. Glad to have you all here. Oh, and one more question for you all. I mean, this is more for the people that have been following me, but when I do interviews, do you like it when I just jump straight into the interview, or do you prefer a 30-second introduction? I've noticed in the numbers, the 30-second introduction ones don't do as well. People drop off. But if I just jump straight into the interview, people might get more invested in it quickly. But just curious. Also, not really feeling the best today either. So we'll see how I hold up. I'm not too bad right now.
Thanks so much for checking out my show. I really, really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. I appreciate all the support. Some big updates here with the arrest of Dr. Michale McKee. Dr. McKee.
Hold on 1 second here. Important thing in the chat. Beautiful. Do you want me to mention this? Well, there's a supporter of mine. She's having an issue. Her father's having a health scare. So if you can send some good vibes into the universe for her father, the Shepherd of Black Sheep would really appreciate it.
Course, is now charged with murdering Spencer and Monique Tepe. Spencer Tepe is the dentist in Columbus, Ohio, who was found shot dead in his home along with his wife, Monique Tepe. And Dr. McKee is Monique Tepe's ex-husband. They got divorced in, I believe it was 2017. So it's been about 8 years since they were divorced, and police say that for whatever reason, we don't know the motive at this point, but 8 years later, after the divorce, according to police, he showed up in Columbus, Ohio, and got into the Tepe's home, and shot and killed Monique and Spencer while their 2 young children were also in the house. So the new development is Dr. McKee, he's a surgeon, by the way, he's a vascular surgeon, was in court. This is our first time seeing.
Oh, and this is the other thing I was thinking about this. This guy is just a fool. I mean, and not even just because he didn't do anything to not get caught, just the fact that he did it to begin with. You're a vascular surgeon. You're higher status. You have some wealth. You could probably do well with other women, but you narrowed down your whole life to losing control of this one woman who now has 2 kids with her current husband. Like, think about that for a minute. That's just absurd. That's absurd. You do that, and not only do you destroy their lives and their children's lives, but you destroyed your own life too. All because you couldn't move on. You couldn't move on from the relationship that didn't work. And again, this all just speaks to me, a narcissistic person who refuses to let go. They refuse to let go because they just can't stand not losing, or they can't stand losing control. Once they are with you, they think they own you, that you're a possession of theirs, and they feel entitled to you. Add that plus their lack of empathy, and at worst, you can get a situation like this. But I just took a step back and I was thinking, man, if you're a dude out there, do anything but do this, right? Like, learn, grow, learn how to let go and accept the past. But whatever it is, don't do this. Don't do this. And it's even worse to me because he was doing pretty well, financially at least, and had a good job. It could have turned out so differently. And he would be the guy that would truly need therapy. And granted, he's also the one that would probably not go to therapy either, right? The people that need therapy are usually the ones that don't go. But he needed therapy. He needed a men's coach to kind of call him forward, as they say. And that's a good distinction between calling forward and calling out. Calling forward is about them. And this is something narcissistic people try to do. They try to call people out, but it's not about you when they do that. When the narcissistic person does it, it's all about them. And they usually do that in an antagonistic way and act like you're never right or a terrible person. That's someone who's doing it that's not on your team. That's hogwash. But anyway, I just thought I would mention that it just really is absurd that he did this.
Dr. McKee in court since his arrest. This is in Illinois. So Dr. McKee works as a vascular surgeon in Illinois. He has in Rockford, Illinois.
So this is, I guess I've never explained it recently. It's my magic wand. I consider it my magic wand, and it's a reminder to myself and others that the little things in life matter. If we can't do the little things right, we're not going to be able to do the big things right. So I got about 5 different colors, and that's why I carry them around, and I have them on me, or at least one of them, at all times.
Is where he was working. He has an apartment, a condo in Chicago, Illinois, and the arrest happened in Illinois. So his first court appearance, which is what you're looking at right here, was in Illinois. It was very, very quick. It only lasted a couple of minutes. He came in looking, to me, very calm, didn't show any emotion, came in, had an attorney with him. And it was over very quickly because this was just an extradition hearing because they need to get him from Illinois back to Ohio, where he's actually facing the 2 murder charges. He did not fight the extradition, which in my experience, normally I haven't seen defendants fight extradition. So this is what I expected, which means that he will be sent now back to Ohio probably pretty quickly, where he'll have his first appearance. And that is when the court process involving these murders will really begin. But the first step was getting him extradited from Illinois back to Ohio, and he will not be fighting the extradition. Again, most of the time when I've covered stories and someone's arrested in another state, they don't normally fight extradition because it's kind of inevitable at some point, unless you're really trying to delay things, at some point you are going to get extradited. And so you're just delaying the inevitable. So he's not fighting it. I did pick up on one thing that I thought was interesting that his attorney said in court today. I want to play you this part of the hearing.
On behalf of Mr. McKee, I will assert his right to counsel. I will assert his right to remain silent. And Mr. McKee believes that the most expeditious manner in which he may defend himself against the charges pending in Ohio and to plead not guilty would be to waive his right to an extradition hearing.
This is part that we went over yesterday too, this clip.
And to have a governor's warrant and to agree to his immediate transportation to Ohio.
So based on what she said, he intends to fight these charges and defend himself. Is that just something that she would have said no matter what his initial plan is, whether he's going to initially plead guilty or not guilty? Maybe that was just something she was going to say regardless, just in this moment at the extradition hearing. We don't really know, but I did think it was interesting that the attorney said that. Something else new, he was initially charged with 2 counts of murder for Spencer and Monique Tepe. It's now aggravated murder, which indicates premeditation, which...
That's a big one, right? Aggravated murder, much more significant, because now with that added layer of premeditation, again, if the DP is on the table there, they look at that premeditation. And a 7-hour car ride speaks to premeditation. Harassing and stalking, whether it's in person or cyberly, that also contributes to this too.
Is important here because it opens up the questions of what police know. The arrest affidavit was very, very basic, essentially just saying that there was a car connected to Dr. McKee that connected him to the murders and also surveillance video. But what else do police know? Had he gone by the house before? Was he planning the murders? Had he been stalking Monique? These are all probably things that are starting to come together in the investigation that we're just not aware of. But the fact that they upgraded the charges to aggravated, indicating premeditation, show us that police know a lot more behind the scenes than what they are letting on right now.
And that's always good to remember, that in these cases, the prosecutor and the DA, they can have a lot more information than they're letting on. So the public doesn't know everything yet. That's something to keep in mind. Until you see the evidence presented by the prosecution during a trial, you don't know. You don't know the entire story. You don't know what they have and they don't have.
Get to my guest in a second, Maureen O'Connell, retired FBI agent. She has some really interesting insight into what she thinks is happening behind the scenes, into what she believes police know, into whether she thinks there was stalking involving Dr. McKee, and her insight into the marriage and what may have gone wrong. Really, really fascinating conversation coming up in a second. But there is one other thing that I wanted to get to, and that is a new 911 call that is coming out from December 19th. So more than a week before the murders. This is a call from someone who lives nearby. This is not from Spencer and Monique Tepe's house, but this is someone who lives nearby calling in about someone banging on their door in the middle of the night.
This is big here. So December 19th, there was a call to 911 because someone was banging on their door in the middle of the night. This is not the Tepe residence. This is somewhere close by, though. And do you think this might have been the ex, Michael McKee, doing this? Was he causing a ruckus? Or is this just grasping at a straw here? What do you think? Let's listen to the call, though.
Around like before 5 a.m., around the time frame of when the murders would eventually happen with Spencer and Monique, which has got a lot of people wondering, could this somehow be connected? Could the person who was banging on the door in the middle of the night at a neighbor's house could that be connected to the murder investigation, even though it was more than a week before? I want to play you this 911 call.
What's the location of your emergency? Okay. Is there an apartment letter number?
No.
What's the emergency?
Somebody's knocking on my door. I think they're trying to get in. They're banging on my door.
Okay. Someone's banging and knocking. Do you know who this is?
No. I'm scared.
Do you have a description of them?
No, I can't see anything. I'm scared.
Have you told them, have you asked them what they want or if they need something?
No.
Okay, what's your name? I'm sorry, say it again.
Yeah.
Does your phone number end in?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I've got it set up for someone banging and knocking on the door. If anything escalates or changes, give us a call back and let us know. We'll get officers there as soon as we can. Mm-hmm. All right, bye.
And then there's
I mean, that woman sounds terrified. Doesn't know who it is banging at her door. I mean, that's scary. It's almost like the movie Clockwork Orange.
of course, the surveillance video, which we have played before they made the arrest. They put out this surveillance video. In the arrest affidavit, it does reference surveillance video. It doesn't say that this is actually Dr. McKee, although you're going to hear Maureen in a second explain why she thinks that this is Dr. McKee. So a lot of moving parts here. Again, I expect we're going to learn a lot more once he does get back to Ohio and we see like a preliminary hearing and he makes his first court appearance actually in Ohio where the murders happened. But certainly interesting to see him in court. This, from what we can tell, very successful vascular surgeon, no criminal history. Now in court, charged with aggravated murder of his ex-wife and her new husband. And when I say new husband, they've been married for years, but you know, her husband, Spencer, who is a dentist. I'm joined now by Maureen O'Connell, a retired FBI agent. She's also
Our friend Maureen, here she is.
the host of the podcast, Best Case, Worst Case. It's nice to see you, Maureen. You and I have been talking about this case with the dentist and his wife murdered in Ohio, and a lot has happened since we last talked. There's so many questions I want to ask you. The first thing, though, is something new. When Dr. Michael McKee was first charged with their murders, it was just a murder charge. Now it's been upgraded to aggravated murder, premeditation. What do you think changed? I mean, what do you think made them upgrade it?
Well, it could be anything, but it could be stalking or something. Maybe they ran his license plate through the LPR reader, and they found him in the area more times than they knew. So maybe he was stalking her. Maybe he was following her around. They updated this after they arrested him. So perhaps they found something on his phone for like photos or something that showed he was taking photos of her at the door with the kids or something along.
And wouldn't that explain how he figured out the keypad too? If he was in distance, and depending on the type of camera he had, I mean, he has the money to get the best kind of camera there is. You got a high-powered camera, you're viewing her from afar, you zoom in, and you might be able to see the number she's clicking there on a pad. Certainly. And this is something, unfortunately, a lot of women in particular have to deal with their narcissistic exes, or maybe they're a psychopathic ex, but this stalking stuff, because they refuse to let go. And it's extremely scary and terrifying for the women. And it's like, dudes, like, just let it go. Like, get a grip. Go, move on, move forward. But they just can't do it.
Those lines. So stalking, I think, would ramp it up a notch, but there are a number of other things that, we'll find out during the trial.
And you saw the video of him in court. What's your first reaction to this guy?
He's a big dude and he's a strong dude. I mean, he's a big, strong man.
Yeah, he apparently played football in college. And when we first had the mugshot, you know, a lot of people were commenting on his job, but when you saw him in court, he's clearly, like you said, a big guy. In the arrest affidavit, it mentions the car. That's really the only evidence that they give. They say surveillance video and then surveillance of a car connected to him. Do you think he drove his own car? I mean, he lived in Chicago. He worked in Rockford, Illinois, I believe. What do you make of that?
I don't think he drove his own car. I think he either drove someone's car that he knew and borrowed, which is not as likely as he possibly rented a car. And I think he did that because he thought he was going to outsmart the detectives. And, you know, homicide detectives don't just get hired as a homicide detective. You're first a police officer, you're pushing a black and white for years, then you move into the detective bureau, and then if you're really good, you become a homicide detective. These guys are very smart, very crafty, and they do a really good and thorough job of looking into all this stuff. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we found out that he either rented a car or borrowed a car, and that's the car he used on that night.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact that they got divorced 8 years ago, or almost 8 years ago? No, it was 8 years ago. You know, do you think he's been stalking her? Do you think, I mean, it's a long time, it seems like, to suddenly for him to pop back up and kill them.
Well, when people believe deeply that their life has been ruined at the hands of another person, just like we saw at Brown, right? They stew and it just grows in their mind. People are asking how this doctor, how he snapped. I don't think he snapped at all. I think it was a long, slow brew, and I think he's a grievance collector.
That's a good word for it. Narcissistic people are grievance collectors. And I agree. I think he was nursing this resentment for a while. He was actually probably getting a source of supply from doing so and building up the rage and trying to figure out, like, oh, what to do about it, and just feeding off of that negative energy, right? And again, he might have dated others as well, but there was something about this one, losing control of Monique. That's something he just couldn't handle. He couldn't take it. And so doesn't matter. It was 8 years ago, could have been 20 years ago. It wouldn't matter if that's what's going on in his head. If that's what's going on in his head, that's why they say Hoovers can happen decades later with people like this. So you're never truly in the clear completely, unfortunately, unless they're in prison or passed away. If they're not that, you do have to be careful. You just do.
Which is what Jim and I talked to you about at the beginning of the Brown case, remember?
Mm-hmm.
He blames her for his unhappiness. His life would be perfect. He probably looked at those images. He saw himself in those images and then blamed not just her, but her husband also. So I think that he's been just pooling this stuff in his mind and feeding it until it got to a point where he's just not putting up with it anymore. I think he's been in a state of depression for whatever reason. And he's blaming it on both of the Teppies. He sees photos. He's got to be able to see photos of them online, even if it is locked. It doesn't matter. It's not hard to find images of people like that. And maybe he got them initially before he was blocked. And, he just ruminates over these things. So I think he's a grievance collector, and it finally just got to the point where, he's done. He's done letting these people live their life while he's not living the life that he should have led. He was a person who believed that hard work could get him anywhere. He played football at a very high level. He went to medical school, and he, as you said, he graduated with honors. He is a man that believes hard work brings great results. And yet here he is, unmarried, alone. Look, and his ex-wife, who was the love of his life, is having a great time. But he could also be someone who's unbelievably controlling. And
Absolutely. Everything a narcissist does about power, control, managing their image, narcissistic supply, and avoiding accountability. Never forget that. You boil it down to one thing, getting what they want. That's what it comes down to. But this also proves to you, as Milton said, the mind can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven. On paper, this guy Michael had a lot of things going for him, but because of his dark triad traits or dark tetrad traits, he couldn't realize what was right in front of him, right? He just couldn't let go. He couldn't go on with his life and move forward. It's just completely unnecessary. The whole thing's just so unnecessary.
He felt that by controlling every aspect of his life, he could make it better, when in reality, it oftentimes makes relationships really bad.
Do you think that he was stalking her?
Yeah, I think for sure he was keeping an eye on her. I don't know what that looks like. Could he have had access to her phone at some point? Maybe. Could he have hacked her phone? It's a possibility. Do you think he knows enough about her? Yeah, I do. So we're gonna find that out in the trial, as I always say. But
So remember, he didn't have social media, but if you're tech savvy in particular, you can wreak havoc just with your hacking skills, right? You can cyber stalk, and it seems like, since they said his location was close to there before too, he very likely could have been stalking in person too. And maybe that's how we got the keypad information, etc. So this is something that's been going on in his mind for a while.
I think sometimes it's the best way to find these things out. Everyone except for that one family member you mentioned has been very tight-lipped about this investigation, and I'm not really sure why.
Well, the one family member said that that no one was really surprised that he was the one arrested, and that they hadn't really brought that up before because they didn't want to compromise the investigation. But it makes me wonder if there was something that they all knew. Like, was she complaining about him? Was he calling again?
She had to complain about him because she was married to him. And when you get divorced and you're a Midwesterner, everybody in your family, because Midwesterners are, as a general rule, very tight with their families. And she seems to be big on family. She probably very likely went to a number of them for advice on what to do. And they probably told her to break up with him long before she even did. So they know the stories. They know the background. She may have bumped into him 5 months ago or something. There's also, when you and I talked before, we talked about why people called within an hour and that was strange. And it is.
Thank you very much for this, Jimmy. To Thrive. Have you done an interview with Dr. Cucciola? Yes, I have. I have done an interview with Dr. Cucciola. I've almost interviewed most of the popular people in the narcissistic abuse space. Really, the only ones I haven't, Richard Grandin, Dr. Romney, and Sam Vaknin. There's probably a couple others. Sinful, I was in talks with Sinful as well, if anyone knows her. But what was I going to say? Oh yes, I'm going to invite Maureen on the channel here too at a point. She knows her stuff, and I could probably get her on.
Very strange. It's one of those things that I think falls under the cat.
Oh, and also to note, Dr. Z, who I've interviewed before, I just saw she was on Court TV talking about this very case. So I'm going to try to get her on again. We might actually do that one in person, and we'll talk about this.
Category of the absence of normalcy. The absence of normalcy is, people having a reaction that you just don't understand why. Now it makes perfect sense. Not only did Monique tell her family, but he told his family too, and his coworkers. Maybe he was afraid that the guy was going to show up at his office because he's a hothead. He's a control freak.
And it was telling when that other family member said, "This is all I'm able to say." Probably because she was talking about it. She was talking about how Michael wasn't leaving her alone or cyber stalking or whatever. So that would add up with the story for sure.
The guy that maybe they don't feel safe. You know, some people won't buy a property or won't rent an apartment if it's on the ground floor because they're afraid of things. When I first saw that house, yeah, it's like that old brownstone style, but you know, they were sleeping on the third floor because a lot of people just don't feel safe on the first floor. I'm wondering if that had something to do with.
So, and thank you for this Tier 2 Thrive. I'll have to check that out. Hopefully you can review that video I sent you. That'll probably be another day. But thank you very much for this 2 Thrive. I appreciate your support.
Past experiences with this McKee guy.
Yeah, I thought about that too, that maybe that's why the coworkers were so concerned. And you were really zoning in on them calling in less than an hour. And while they didn't say it on the calls, maybe they were concerned because they knew that this ex had been coming around. And also remember, the one says, and the wife isn't answering, Monique isn't answering either, which has us especially worried. Kind of plays into maybe they knew something. Maybe he had been talking about it at work. Oh, this guy's creeping us out or something.
Right. It very well could be.
Yeah. You know, I was looking at their wedding photos, Dr. McKee and Monique's wedding photos from 2017. And, you know, they look like a young, very attractive, happy couple back then. And he's obviously, he was in his residency, but then he became a vascular surgeon and, you know, he has no issues within his medical record. And it seems like he was very successful professionally. It does make me wonder why he didn't get married again.
I wonder why he didn't get married again also. And it could be just because, you know, she was the love of his life. She appeared to be the most wonderful, beautiful woman, you know, and a great mom.
So Peg, as you were saying before, I didn't think he was married again, and they're confirming it now. No, he was not married. He might have had girlfriends, Michael McKee, but he was not married again.
And that's heartbreaking because, you know, for whatever reason. But he also moved around a lot, didn't he? He went to Vegas. He was in LA for a couple of years. What was he looking for? I mean, was he going around for job opportunities, for training, or trying to move into a different area or to get really good at what he was doing? Did he go to, I don't know the hospitals he went to, but if he went to Cedars-Sinai or UCLA in LA because he wanted to become the best surgeon he could, that wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility considering what he likes to do. He likes to perform at a very high level.
Yeah, and he lived in from what we can tell, a very, very expensive, fancy condo in Los Angeles, and also in the Lincoln Park area of Chicago. So he lived in some nice places.
I wonder if one of his favorite movies was American Psycho. And I wonder if he would compare his apartment to other people's apartment in town. And maybe to him, Spencer Tepe was Paul Allen. Patrick Bateman's Paul Allen was Michael McKee's Spencer Tepe.
But no criminal history that we can find. How does someone go from being successful, disciplined surgeon, no criminal history, to killing two people?
Well, you can have a lot of really bad, frightening, scary activity in your background and not have a criminal record. And you often find that out if you work an investigation long and hard on some of these people, because, and I think we may have talked about this once before with the Reiner case. If you're getting in trouble, let's say he's getting in trouble at work, the deal is, hey, you need to leave this hospital. We're not going to have you here anymore. You're frightening some of the nursing staff, and we can't have that. So then what does he do? He just goes cross country, works for a year and a half, hope everything dies down, and then heads back toward home. Like working in Rockford, Illinois from Chicago, there's so many awesome hospitals in Chicago. Like 15 minutes from where his house is Northwestern. You've got University of Chicago. You've got all these just outstanding hospitals. And for someone that really strives for the very top, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Rockford. I'm sure they have great hospitals, but it seems to me that the doctors that move to a place like Rockford want to live in Rockford. So they don't have a long commute. It's really nice. It's a good hospital. They're raising the bar at that hospital. That's understandable. But from Chicago to Rockford, that's quite a commute because he's in a really busy, traffic heavy part of the city. That's where he's choosing to live.
I guess I just go back.
And the other thing is, past criminal history has nothing to do with it. I mentioned yesterday how a lot of narcissistic people can have a devil's luck, and they can really mask. They mask, and they usually only mistreat their targets. They don't mistreat everybody. They mistreat their targets. They mistreat the people like Monique and her husband. That's what they do. And to other people, they can appear completely normal. And just because you have a personality disorder doesn't mean you're going to do petty theft. Doesn't mean you're going to do stupid stuff like that. I mean, it's also common for them to get drinking and driving or drug charges, but not always, right? It just depends. It depends on what their version of narcissistic supply is. So don't ever let it fool you just because they don't have a criminal record. It doesn't mean they're squeaky clean. It doesn't mean they're not doing terrible things, just not terrible things to be arrested for yet.
Back to, you've spent your whole life working so hard, and you've achieved this. You're a vascular surgeon. What happens where you would just know that you're probably giving all that, and then you become a killer? You kill two people. Like, can people? I know you said you don't look at it like snapping, but to me, it just feels like, do they just snap? Or
he could have been suicidal, Brian. And once you're suicidal, in order to convince yourself to kill yourself, you have to devalue human life. You have to say the world is better without me. And how many times have we seen suicidal people become homicidal? Because that line is very, very thin. Once you convince yourself that your life is valueless, then what's the difference with anyone else? Well,
I don't even have to say you have to consider your own life valueless. It's more about considering other people's lives valueless, seeing them as objects, seeing them as things to be used. That's what they'll do. And what kinds of people do that? The people that lack empathy. They lack empathy. They see people as objects. They see people as just things to use, and they feel entitled to use them as they wish. And in the most extreme of cases, this is how it turns out.
Well, if I am going to take my life, and it may have been his plan, like if they were closing in on him and he knew they were closing in on him, he could have very easily committed suicide. Who knows? That could have been part of his plan. But if you're going to kill yourself, you can see how someone would say, you know what? I'm taking those two with me because they're the reason that I'm not worth anything. My life would be fantastic if she didn't ruin it and he didn't help her. Or he may have just, the husband may have been collateral because he realized he couldn't get at her without getting at him. Maybe he drew the line at, I can't kill the kids too, and I'm not going to kill their mother right in front of them. We don't know. We may find out later. I'm not sure. But he seems to be right now in a cooperative mood. But we'll see how that goes.
It's sad to think about when he went into the house. You just think, I wonder if there was some kind of conversation he had with them before. I wonder if he just went in and killed them, or if there was a moment of, this is why I'm doing this. And
what do you think, chat? He walks in the door. Do you think he wakes him up? Or just goes bang, bang, no talk? I bet you there was some sort of interaction there, if I had to guess. But maybe not. Maybe there's an element of sadistic pleasure in trying to see them squirm before they do it, maybe. And like seeing maybe the terror in their face. I mean, if someone's sadistic, that's what they go for. That's what they go for. If you've seen the girl with the dragon tattoo, the serial killer in that movie mentions that when he would see the hope drain out of people's faces, it would sexually arouse him because he was a sexual sadist, the guy in the movie. So I do wonder, but what do you think, chat?
Well, he didn't kill both of them at once, and it was a very loud bang. And I think that's exactly why they know precisely what time they both died, is because someone heard gunshots. And when they went door to door and they were interviewing everybody, someone said, I woke up and I thought it was fireworks, but I heard 5 or 7 loud bangs, and I counted them. I looked at my phone and it said 3:32 or whatever that time was that they decided. So if you're going,
and that's another thing to think about too. So they hear these loud bangs at 3:52 a.m. and no one decides to call the police. Though the person banging on the door will call the police and 911. That mystery woman from the spring before calls 911 for a domestic dispute. We don't know yet if it was their house, another house. We just know that Monique's family and the chief of police say it wasn't Monique, right? But you hear these 5 gunshots, and you would think the kids would wake up. You would think, right? 5 gunshots. Now, again, I think I read something about a silencer. I think, but I'm not positive.
going in that room and you're firing off a bunch of rounds, the first round's waking everybody up, including the golden doodle. Now, there are many, many instances, like people often ask law enforcement, why do you shoot so many times when you shoot someone? Why don't you just shoot them once? Well, there are many instances where you use a large caliber round and you literally blow someone's heart up in their chest, let's say, and they can still have 60 seconds of fight within them. Like they can.
Right. And that's a brutal truth too. But police, as military, if they use their firearm, they are trained to kill. They're not trained to injure. And they're trained to fire until the threat is neutralized for that very reason. Because even if you get that shot to the chest, they got 60 seconds where they might be a goner, but they can still make you a goner too in that last 60 seconds.
Come at you and go until all the oxygen is out of their blood. You need that heart to pump blood. But the blood that's currently in your system, as long as there's oxygen in it, they can still fight. And especially if they're on some form of narcotics, which I'm not alleging that has anything to do with this case. All I'm saying is one round often won't do the trick. And that may have been what happened with the husband waking up. Remember, we talked about an alpha. When you've got someone that's going to come after you and fight you, that's why I believe he pumped a couple of rounds into him.
And like you said, I mean, they have the specific time in the affidavit, 3:52 a.m., whereas a lot of the other cases I've covered, it'll be like a range, like we believe the murders happened between 2 and 5, but they have 3:52. So like you said, I guess it could be a neighbor, or maybe even they heard it on the Ring camera.
Right.
So they were able to pinpoint the time.
I don't know if Ring cameras go off with, I think they're activated with motion as a general rule, but maybe the dog was going bananas.
Yeah. How do you think he got in the house?
I think he either guessed the code, like maybe he went there on days past dressed like a delivery man, like if he saw a package and walked up there with a mask on or something and tried a number. And who knows? You don't have to open the door. You just try the number. And if you walk away at that point, it just defaults back to being locked.
Or could he have knocked on the door and one of them came down and opened the door?
I don't see that happening because they were both found up in their bed. I don't know. I guess they could have. Honestly, who's letting anyone in at 2? No one's coming to your door at 2 o'clock in the morning for anything good.
Right. So
Nobody.
You think he got in there some way on his own?
I think he got in there.
Yeah, he's probably singing, I'm singing in the rain, and saying he has to use the bathroom. That's probably what happened.
Now, there have been cases throughout, history where people break into the house at a different time during the day, like she's unloading groceries, or that wouldn't necessarily work. But let's just say at another time, and they'll leave a basement window or the basement door open. Like if he left his home early in the morning and got there and somehow was able to, I don't know, he could have surveilled the house long enough to get the code, because when you think about it, I watch people put their PIN numbers in at the grocery store, and it just boggles my mind. They're just like 1 3 3 2 1.
Right.
I mean, and I'm like, what are you doing?
She's funny.
People, I've heard people in neighborhoods like, hey, what's the garage code again? 3467. And oh my God, I can't take it. But
so that's her criminal mind working, right? Or I shouldn't say criminal mind, her law enforcement mind and detective mind. She has that front and center. And everyone has their own thing that they're an expert in, right? She's an expert in law and crime and being safe and taking precautions. Other people are maybe experts in narcissism and toxic relationships like me, or dysfunctional family dynamics, or mental health and addiction, right? Everyone has their forte. That's why, there's something to learn from everyone.
It's not my house, not my problem. Who knows how she could have used her dad's birthday for everything, or the daughter's birthday for everything, or whichever child is older. Birthdays are what a lot of people use in their for their PIN numbers.
There is a new 911 call that's come out from December 19th. So, about 11 days before the murders, from a neighbor who is calling 911 about someone banging on her door, and says, that person may have been banging on other doors too. And they say, okay, we'll send an officer out to check it out. That's the most we know of it. Do you think that could be connected?
No, I think it's probably a drunk. I would find out if there's a bar nearby, or because of the timing of it. Even that was the first thing a lot of people thought of too when they saw that guy walking down the alley. Is there a bar nearby? Because drunk people walk by, tend to walk far from bars, especially people that drink a lot. And I say that because they want to park further away so that they can maybe take side streets, or not travel down the main drag when they leave the bar, because they think police sit out there and wait for someone to come out.
So you think that's probably unrelated?
So she thinks it might be a drunk person. I don't know. We'd have to see the location there. Is there bars close by? I don't know.
I think it's probably unrelated. I think the police are very clear. They must be already clear on why that happened. They'll know if there was a party nearby, or if there's a bar nearby or something like that. I don't think it was related. It's usually wasted people that go to a couple houses. But you know what? It could be a criminal too. There could be a criminal that went door to door. And he said today in his extradition hearing that his attorney said that he's looking forward to fighting these charges. So that will be an element of that will be something that his defense will put forth in the trial, to try to say it must be the same guy from a few days, 11 days before. But I don't believe it has anything to do with it.
Yeah, I heard that I think it was just a public defender in Illinois say that, because it was a very basic hearing, just an extradition hearing, and now he'll go on to Ohio. I was kind of wondering, I picked up on that too when she said he'll fight the charges. I was wondering if she just was she always says that, or just thought that was the appropriate thing to say before he went out, was extradited, or if that actually meant something, that he actually
pled not guilty,
Yeah. I mean, do you get the sense from him that he's going to try to fight, or is this more, like you mentioned, suicidal and depression, and could he just kind of like own up to this?
Well, now he's backed into a corner, so that's going to bring out a whole different part of his personality. I don't know. I do know that things change. Your mind changes. He may he may have a sense of euphoria that he finally did, and he was able to do what he really wanted to do all these years. So he may have a new reason to live, as terrible as that sounds. We don't know. He's also very likely going to get a bunch of letters from these psychotic women that just stalk all these inmates, like, you know, the Mangione effect. So he might.
And that's something we talked about before, right? With the school shooters, hybristophilia, it's called, where there's a lot of usually younger women. They get obsessed with the killers. This was true with Ted Bundy, and she just mentioned Mangione. We saw that with Mangione, didn't we? There was a lot of women not even hiding it. They were basically drooling all over him, saying, this guy can do whatever he wants to me. So it's definitely a thing.
He might be feeling better because of that. I don't know. We'll see. But, you know, what does he have to live for now? Anyways, his poor family.
Yeah.
I don't know.
When I saw him in court, my first thought, because he looked kind of like disheveled in the mugshot, at least that's what I thought, and he was unshaven and the big jaw. But when I saw the court video, he seemed like kind of put together, I thought, and didn't like seem nervous or anything. You know, like
I agree.
He almost seemed like confident, like he was entering the operating room to tell them what to do or something, you know?
He was standing tall. He had his shoulders back, his head up, and that giant jaw, you know?
So I don't know if that would give us an indication of how he plans to, you know,
we'll know
act.
more. We'll know more within the next couple of weeks, because he's going to hire an attorney, or maybe he's just not going to waste his money on an attorney. We don't know. He has to, though, because he's probably made too much money and he's got too many assets to get a public defender. But I don't know. He may just. We'll know. We'll have a much better idea within the next 7 days, I would say.
When I covered the Gabby Petito case, there were all these things that I didn't see in videos. Like once we started seeing videos of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie that like were little signs of domestic abuse that then women pointed out to me after that had been victims that I just didn't know to pick up on. And then when I saw them, I was like, oh my gosh. And it's interesting with this case, when I heard, oh, they were divorced 8 years ago, my first thought was, like, gosh, it's been 8 years. Like, how is this guy connected? But I even got some emails today from women who are like, no, like I've been divorced for 20 years and I still look like over my shoulder every single day. And I still think this guy is going to show up in my name. Like it was kind of eye-opening to me that most of the women I've spoken to are like, no, that you had the totally wrong reaction. Like that doesn't surprise me at all.
Right. Exactly. People who understand domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, coercive control, and trauma bonds, and they know that Hoovers can happen even decades later. To the people who understand that, they know. That doesn't come as a surprise. In fact, it's their norm, which is terrible for them, but they understand it. They understand. And I understand because I see it all the time.
Right. I work with a lot of victims of sexual assault. And it's just harrowing what they've gone through. And I you know, it's that Gabby Petito case. I really think that broke my heart. That was just, oh God.
I just mean though that he could have held a grudge this long doesn't seem that surprising to a lot of women.
No, it's not surprising at all.
And that's why she's a future friend of the channel. Maureen. She knows her shit.
Mm-mm.
Anything
there are people that hold grudges for all kinds of reasons for their entire life. And it's just the way they live. It's like, you know, how they say things take up free rent in your head or whatever. These people allow these situations to be omnipresent at all times. Like he probably told himself time and time again, yeah, if I do this, if I get this job, then she'll definitely come back with me because I'll be the guy she wants to be with.
And back to the stalking.
And that's certainly possible that he wasn't he wasn't letting go of hope, even though she was married and had 2 kids, right? But also to note, there's an Arabic expression that love sees sharp, hate sees sharper, but jealousy sees the sharpest of all, because it is hate and love at the same time. And if someone is narcissistic, they can have extreme envy and jealousy, which can get extremely dangerous.
I just was thinking about this. Even if he wasn't at their house watching them, with Facebook now, and their wedding video was online, and some people have commented that there were more views of their wedding video in December before you could see the view count before the murders. It would be easy to get wrapped up in an ex without even going to see them face to face. I mean, you could just find all the pictures online.
Right. And she probably blocked him, but there are ways to work around that. Like, for example, I worked a case one time where this guy befriended all of the best friends of this one person he was stalking. He made each of these women feel that the only reason they couldn't be together in love for the rest of their life was because the actual victim of the stalking was in love with him and he didn't want to break her heart because he's too nice of a guy. I mean, it was crazy. All 3 of her friends from 3 different aspects of her life fell for it. Now, if he did that with friends of hers, let's say, they would be providing him with all kinds of intel about her. I'm just saying, there's a lot of ways that these detectives have seen, that law enforcement officers have seen, where you can get information in very unconventional ways.
As always, I really, really appreciate Maureen for talking with me. Her insight is just invaluable. This is obviously a case that I'm going to stay on top of. I'll keep.
Of course. Good video, Brian and Maureen. Round of applause. Now to our other friend. To our News Nation friends here. From one News Nation friend to another.
Ashley Banfield, Drop Dead Serious, and I have a lot to get to in this episode about the Ohio double murder, Spencer and Monique Tepe. Like, when I say a lot, I mean a lot of new information, a court appearance, photos of the ex-husband, jilted ex-husband maybe, who is a vascular surgeon in court in yellow jailhouse, fatigues, facing the very real reality that he could face the death penalty at this point. Charges upgraded. I'll tell you why, what they are now. And I've got a couple of really good interviews for you. A neighbor.
And so the aggravated homicide charge makes a death penalty more likely.
Of Dr. Michael McKee in that fancy high-rise apartment in Chicago, tells me all about what her interactions were like with him, and how the building is dealing with this and what the building told all the residents after this arrest. I also have Anjanette Levy on the program with me today. She's the host of Crime Fix on Law and Crime. She's an Ohio native. And she's got this grapevine that has been reaching out to her with lots of background information and, really good scoops since the story broke. So she's going to join me. And not only that, I got a couple more like really great nuggets of information to share with you about what the cops are doing right now in order to build the case if they haven't already got it. So if you want to catch up on all of the arrest details, as well as my full breakdown of Dr. Michael McKee and his relationship with Monique. Now, she was Monique McKee. She became Monique Tepe. I do want to tell my audience right now, because some of you were very upset when I was calling her Mo. That's how she referred to herself. That's how friends and family refer to her. She goes by Mo. So if you hear me using the phrase, Mo and Spencer Tepe, that's how she referred to herself. This was not me, picking a nickname for her. Far from it. I've done another case where the victim's name was Mo. It was in Texas. 2 cyclists. It was a love triangle. Mo was murdered. She went by Mo, and that's what we called her. So I just want to assuage your concerns if you think that I was being disrespectful. I was actually just trying to honor how Monique likes to be referred. So I go back and forth between the formal Monique and Mo. I am going to link my latest episode in the description of this podcast so you can get right up to speed. There's also a playlist if you want to get really caught up on the case and go back a couple more episodes, from start to finish. I also want to make another reference. I read your comments, y'all. I do. And so a couple of you were very upset with me referencing Brian Koberger as relates to this case. And that is also very strategic. I have been in true crime long enough, 38 years in this business, so that I know one crime informs detectives as they move forward in future crime fighting. So often the things that Dahmer did, the things that Bundy did, the things that BK did, these things actually change crime fighting techniques, and they are shared nationwide. They have.
And surely Ashley knows this, but when you're a creator, there is no limit to what people might get upset at you for. It's just, until you do it, you'll never know all of the ways people will find to hate on you or be mad at you. And of course, the bigger you are, the more ways you discover. So for me, between Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, I've heard all sorts of hate about myself. And I've had to learn, well, my rule of thumb is this. If a comment is instantly antagonistic, I try to ignore it, because it's usually just not worth it to spend the time on that comment. Other times I'll say things to myself like, lions don't lose sleep over the opinion of sheep, or when you argue with a fool, then there are two. Those things do really help when push comes to shove.
Conferences about crime fighting techniques. And so when I talk about Koberger and the things he did at 1122 King Road and how similar that sort of style of killing was to the Tepe home killing, it is strictly about the strategic attack, not just by the killer, but also by the police officers in their investigative and detective work. So there is a lot that can inform what the police are doing now based on what happened at 1122 King Road, and new things that police will be doing across the country because of Brian Koberger at 1122 King Road. So again, no disrespect, just actual true crime reporting from somebody who's just been to this rodeo so many times and so many crimes. So let's get right down to business. Since Dr. McKee was arrested, that was Saturday morning, kind of came out of the blue for a lot of us, a lot more pieces have started to fall into place. There's like new details, a lot of new clues, and there's also a clearer sense of how the case is coming together, along with some early signals about where investigators and prosecutors may be headed. So let me start from the beginning. So as I'm sure you know by now, Dr. McKee was arrested on Saturday morning. They picked him up in Rockford, Illinois. I know, weird. These are like an hour and a half apart, Rockford and where he actually lives in Chicago. So he lives in Chicago, right on Lake Michigan. Rockford is like 80 miles away. That's where he works. I guess he was commuting an hour and a half every day. And on a Saturday morning, they got.
And about that commute, I've heard several people say it was because there was a non-compete arrangement that Dr. Tepe had. I haven't seen that confirmed anywhere. So chat, have you seen that confirmed anywhere, that he had a non-compete arrangement and that's why he had to drive so far to work?
Got him in Rockford. So maybe he was putting in a shift on Saturday morning. That's where they found his vehicle. That's where they arrested him. And the investigators say they linked him to a vehicle that was captured on surveillance video arriving near the home of Monique and Spencer Tepe in Columbus, Ohio, shortly before the murders, and wouldn't you know it, leaving that area shortly afterwards. I want to just clarify one thing. I've gone back and forth a little bit about whether this was his car that they found. The operative word there being his. They say that he was in possession of this car. And some took it to mean that he possessed this car, owned this car. Others are taking it to mean he was in possession. Maybe he stole it, allegedly. Maybe he rented it, allegedly. We're not exactly sure whether it was his actual vehicle, but whatever it was a vehicle that they connected to him that ended up in the Tepe neighborhood right before and right after the murders leaving. So anybody who's ever watched a cop show knows there is no statute of limitations on murder. But apparently, if Monique Tepe's first husband really did slip into her home and murder both her and her second husband, there is no statute of limitations on revenge either. Monique and Michael McKee, who is a vascular surgeon in Rockford, Illinois, these two were married for less than a year before splitting up and then divorcing 14 months later. So kind of a blip, right? And that blip was a full decade ago. So let that sink in. This wasn't like a year or two ago and she's found a new guy and it's all very upsetting. This is a decade and more ago. Like I said at the top of this episode, a lot of us did not see this arrest coming. But the Daily Mail reports that for the first time since the killings, members of Monique's family spoke publicly on Sunday before the family's private visitation. And what they shared was like super painful, but also very revealing. You know, Monique's relatives said the family had their suspicions for a while about who they believed was responsible. So when the arrest happened, they said it brought relief, but that it didn't come out of nowhere.
So what would be very interesting is to interview the family and ask them why it didn't come as a surprise. What did you hear? What did Monique say? And we already see some of it, right? Just look back to the timeline of when Monique left the relationship with Michael. She left while he was at work, and she had her family come in there with a U-Haul to basically flee while Michael was at work. I mean, that's not something you have to do in a normal breakup. But in a breakup with a narcissistic person or a domestic abuser, that is what you have to do. So that, again, that wouldn't surprise me. Even if that is all it was, it wouldn't surprise me. But chances are he was either stalking her in person or cyber stalking her since. That's not confirmed. That's just speculation.
That's telling. The family member said they had privately believed that Dr. Michael McKee, her ex-husband, was involved. But they said they made a very conscious decision not to say that out loud to the public while this investigation was ongoing. And that's really big of them, right? Because imagine the pain they're going through. Imagine the vengeance they want to exact. And they kept quiet in honor of that investigation. They said they didn't want to jeopardize anything. They didn't want to interfere. So they waited quietly while the police did their work. After the arrest, the relatives said that there was a real sense of relief knowing that the person they suspected was now in custody, even though the grief was still very much there. And what's interesting, it was not described as shock to them. It was described more like as a confirmation of what they already had feared. Again, very telling. And when asked whether Monique or Spencer had been dealing with any recent problems involving Dr. Michael McKee, the family member said they weren't aware of any specific conflicts in the days or the weeks leading up to the killings. So that's super interesting too, right? Because I keep coming back to, if Dr. McKee did this, yeah, we want to know the why, but we also want to know, like, what triggered now, a decade later? And I'm going to have more on that in just a minute. But Dr. McKee is now charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder.
There didn't need to be a trigger. This could have been something slow building, a slow burn, nurturing the resentment. There didn't need to be a trigger, period.
With premeditation. Those charges probably sound different than they were just yesterday, even just early this morning. And that's because they were upgraded from plain old murder. It's very different in Ohio, murder and aggravated murder. That happened this morning. And I am recording this on Monday, January 12th. So big upgrade from murder to aggravated murder. And why that's significant in the state of Ohio is that aggravated murder is functionally the equivalent of first-degree murder in other states. It means that
Premeditated is what it means.
prosecutors believe that they can show either prior calculation and design, in other words, planning, or that the killing happened during the commission of another serious felony. And I believe as well, multiple victims qualifies you. We're talking about crimes that, if you commit a murder in Ohio and you've got a crime like a kidnapping, a rape, an aggravated robbery, an arson, an aggravated burglary, that can get you up to aggravated murder. And why does that matter? Because aggravated murder makes you eligible in Ohio for the death penalty. I know Ohio's got a moratorium. They haven't executed anybody since 2018 or 19, but it doesn't matter because moratoriums can change. If, drug protocols change or firing squads are approved, suddenly moratoriums can be lifted. Some moratoriums are based on morals. Some moratoriums are based on the availability of the drugs that you use to execute. So it's still on the books in Ohio and they are still using it. They're just not executing right now. So that should put that all in a box for you. When Dr. McKee was marched into an Illinois courtroom today, this was the outfit. Now, I'm sure that a vascular surgeon makes a lot of money, and this is not what he's used to wearing, but it's the old yellow jail jumpsuit that this county gives to their inmates. And they took no risks with somebody this high profile, charged with two of the most serious crimes you can be charged with in this country, aggravated murder. He was shackled. He was shackled at the hands. Those hands were shackled to his tummy, and that tummy chain went all the way around his back. Here's my assumption, although I couldn't see it from the camera angle, he was probably in leg irons as well. He seemed to be shuffling along, and that's usually indicative of leg irons. Although, honestly, some people shuffle. And I say that because I still want to know if it was Dr. McKee, they're going to allege was the hulking figure in the back alley skulking along after the murders. Because there's a definite shuffle gait to the person who's walking in the back alley. And you cannot compare it to the courtroom because if you're wearing, leg irons, you're not walking like you normally would walk. But incidentally, let's just get to the meat and potatoes of this hearing. It was really short. Like way shorter than I thought. I thought we might hear some details, probable cause, something to keep him held, even if it's not in the place where he's going to be held because he's going to be extradited.
And in regards to the death penalty, it's very dependent on state. It's not really handed out equivalently. I mean, some states don't have it. Some states there's a moratorium. If you kill a law enforcement official, or you're doing it while robbing a bank, and then maybe you kill a police officer, even though it's one person, that's enough. That's enough to get the death penalty right there because you're committing the bank robbery plus killing a law enforcement official. So again, it depends. Depends on where you are. Depends on where you are. And what you did, of course, too.
But he didn't even enter a plea. And this was interesting. He agreed not to fight extra.
Thank you for this too, Thrive. Yeah, so the explanation we heard yesterday is he had a version of like cold and calculatedness that helped him to be a surgeon, but then he was also emotional. The combination of his personality traits, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. Honestly, though, the most dangerous trait is a lack of empathy, though, if you ask me. A lack of empathy plus extreme self-centeredness.
Tradition, which means he's not fighting the transfer back to Columbus, Ohio. I see that sometimes, not often. I often see waiving extradition, but sometimes I see them fight it. I never know why, because it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So it's just if the jail's really cushy and nice and you don't want to go to a yucky one in Columbus. But how do you know? You're a vascular surgeon. How could you possibly know the difference, in jail life? But sometimes attorneys will be wise about that. And that might be the reason to fight extradition. Anyway, he's not. He's not fighting extradition. In fact, the only thing that Dr. McKee muttered in court today was his name. So just have a look.
Third court, the defendant is present in custody.
Your name, sir, for the record? Michael McKee. Have you had a chance to speak with him?
Yes, Your Honor.
Earlier on my News Nation show, Banfield, I talked to News Nation correspondent Alex Capriello. He was inside that courtroom. He was lucky enough to get in there. And here's my conversation with Alex.
Okay, just walk me through that very quick appearance and then everything that's outside of the camera view, Alex.
Yeah, super interesting to actually be there in person. Obviously, this was the first time Michael McKee made an appearance in front of a judge, and therefore the first time that we could lay eyes on him other than the mugshot that was posted to the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office. Ashley, the first thing I noticed is something that you alluded to in your intro there, which was his size. He seemed huge to me.
Kat isn't like Willy Wonka. She doesn't sugarcoat shit.
According to the records from the booking, he's 6'1", 200 pounds, and he looks every single bit of it. I think maybe even the yellow jumpsuit with that deep V-neck makes him look even more hulking. But overall, his personality, his behavior was kind of the opposite of that. He seemed rather timid. He seemed shy. Obviously, he didn't speak all that much other than saying his name, but really very little eye contact, very little emotion coming out of him overall. So while today was not a plea hearing, obviously we heard from that public defender that was appointed to him that he intends to plead not guilty when he does get to Ohio. He recognizes that the easiest and fastest way to move forward for everybody, for himself as defendant, for the people in Winnebago County, for the people in Franklin County, is to waive extradition. So that's what this was all about today. He did not put up a fight. He signed the paperwork. He was out in about 1 minute and 34 seconds by my stopwatch. So you're right. A very, very quick hearing today.
I've heard that this whole extradition process can take under a week. They can even expedite it if the sheriffs agree to all the logistics of getting him from one place to the other. So we may see him in a different color in the coming days when he gets to Columbus. But you know what I'm really curious about, Alex? A guy like this, who is a vascular surgeon, and I have not seen anywhere that he has a wife or children or a family to support. He's just making good money as a vascular surgeon and presumably banking it for years. He's got enough money for a big, expensive lawyer. Understandably, this isn't the jurisdiction, so the public defender showed up. But did they say anything in this hearing about, Judge, there's going to be another lawyer on the docket soon?
I didn't catch any of that. I didn't put it in my notes, and I listen pretty hard when I'm inside any sort of criminal courtroom. I asked the court administrator about who that was representing, and that was an executive public defender, so to speak, for Winnebago County that was just there to handle sort of the logistics of what was happening and at least to make contact with the defendant, make sure he understood his constitutional rights and so on and so forth. But I think you bring up a great point in terms of actually retaining counsel, because this is a very high profile surgeon who had a well-paying job and presumably had been doing that for years.
I just keep looking at that mugshot and thinking it's not the same person in the wedding pictures who, Motepi married. It's just so.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not sure if you've all heard this expression is, but they say you're responsible for your face by the time you're 40. What does that mean? It means, and I think there's some truth in this, that your face contorts to your personality and character. So people with lower levels of empathy or no empathy, their face is going to look a little bit different over the years. But very kind-hearted people, their faces that are very empathetic and compassionate, their faces are going to look different. And it's pretty clear to see. I should do a demonstration of this. Part of it is in the eyes, though. So there's doe eyes. So you look at a guy that has doe eyes. Often that's a part of it, right? There'll be someone that is a little more gentle. But eyes who are more squinted like, they call it the Canthart tilt. If you ever heard of that, the predator's eyes. Just something to pay attention to.
Alarming, but I'm sure we'll learn more. Alex Capriello, great work. Thank you for this.
As I mentioned, Dr. Michael McKee worked in Rockford, Illinois, but he lived in Chicago, about 80 miles away. He was arrested in Rockford, but his very fancy apartment was in Chicago. Man, this guy lived really well. He lived in a vintage Lincoln Park high-rise, complete with a doorman and a rooftop pool and a stunning view of Lake Michigan. Like the building alone has a great view of the lake, but Dr. McKee's apartment, boom, almost looked like you're looking out on the Caribbean. I know, don't laugh, like Michigan is not the Caribbean, but the real estate pictures make his view from his actual apartment just look so beautiful. The water is like crystal blue. There you go. Needless to say, the neighbors in this beautiful building are dumbfounded, shocked, like they can't believe they are hearing of this kind of an arrest of one of their neighbors. And earlier on my News Nation show, I talked to one of those neighbors. Geraldine Koleric lives in Dr. McKee's building 2 floors down, and she spoke to him many times before he ended up being arrested for a double murder. Here's my conversation with her. Geraldine, thank you so much for being on the program. I just wanted to get your first reaction to hearing that this neighbor of yours, who you'd spoken with and thought was delightful, has been arrested on 2 aggravated murders.
Yeah, it's really was a shock.
Now pay attention to this, right? Because like we always say, narcissistic people can be a completely different person behind closed doors than they are in public. In public, they have their persona. This doesn't mean their narcissism is off. It just means that it's operating in a different way to get their needs met. So let's see what this woman says about Michael.
The building and everything, because I met him really once. We really talked at the poolside, and that was during the summer, shortly after he moved in. And we talked at the pool, and he was very friendly. We were all barbecuing at that time, and he did not seem like somebody that would be doing something like this. But like Ashley, like you point out, you don't know what is in a person's mind, what they're obsessing about, and what they're going through in their mind, and what causes them to react like this. But I would see him, and we would pass each other. I saw him last week, too, going by. And, you know, we would just say, hi, how are you? Hi. And that's it. We never really spoke after that. He was kind of a quiet person to himself. But, you know, it is shocking that a resident of this building was charged with such a terrible crime. And residents
I can't imagine. Can I ask you, how did you all even find
No interrupting, Ashley.
out? Like, how did the news sort of spread through the building?
Well, I found out because there was Channel 7 crew that was outside there of our building trying to talk to residents. And I walked up to them because I used to work at Channel 7 in Chicago. I was the assignment editor. And I said, what's happening over here? What's going on? The doorman said you wanted to talk with me. And they told me about what was happening. And when they said Michael McKee, I said, well, I don't know.
It's my pet peeve as an interviewer when people try to overtalk someone else while they're interviewing them. Not a fan of that.
Oh, if I know him, show me a picture. And then they showed me the picture. And I went, oh my gosh, I know him. He's one of my neighbors. He lives two stories above me in the building here. And I said, why? My goodness, it was unbelievable that this man who was just so nice when I talked to him. And then, as I said, we would pass each other. This is a building of a lot of professional people, okay? And people that come in.
Speaking of that, I want to let, sorry to interrupt, Geraldine, sorry to interrupt, but I want to let our viewers know that when you say it's a building of professional people, that includes you. You're not only did you work at Channel 7 as an assignment editor, you're also a true crime author. So tell the audience what you did to take a peek 2 floors up where he lived and what you saw.
Well, I went upstairs and I saw a police officer sitting right in front of his door, guarding his place there. And I took a little video. I guess it's the newswoman in me. And I also took a picture of what his apartment looked like from the outside. And I just was surprised that there's a police officer on duty there 24 hours. And then I came up the next day, and there, Lord and behold, I saw that there were now investigators there. And I went to get my car in the garage, and there was an investigation van saying Crime Lab from Columbus. So that is something else that I videotaped right away. And the investigators going to the van. And when I went upstairs, I saw that they were taking boxes of stuff out of there and putting it in there. They had one box and they were putting stuff in there. You know what? It's a very circumstantial evidence thing. You have the digital stuff and so on, but you don't have the firing gun. You know what I mean? That's something that they're looking for. And I'm sure that they're also looking for any messages he had or drawings and things like that.
We're about to do a deep dive with investigators who do this for a living, who are going to run down the list of everything they probably looked for in that apartment and seized, as well as other places as well. But I'd like to just ask you in retrospect, you know, we all look back at things and people when we learn something that's jarring, and then we think, okay, that now in retrospect, it's unusual. Was there anything about Dr. Michael McKee that was the least bit unusual or struck you as unusual in retrospect?
No, nothing struck me as being unusual.
And that's the thing that people need to take note of, right? Nothing struck her as unusual. And this person allegedly murdered 2 people. But what I would also say is not everyone knows what to look for as well. That is also true. But if you've been through narcissistic abuse, coercive control, and you've been through both types, the grandiose types and the covert types, now you are the most equipped to be able to figure it out. Because unfortunately, what happens to a lot of people is they'll get with a grandiose narcissist, and then they think to themselves, oh, I want to get with someone that's exactly the opposite of that terrible experience. And then they wind up with someone who's just more covert. They do all the same things except in covert ways, and it comes out later. So I've seen that happen a lot. But the people who understand both and all the different kinds of pathology, they are the most likely to be able to see it. And as always, once you understand it, trust your gut, because it's not enough just to see the red flags if you don't act on them. I've seen a lot of people tell me, oh, I saw the red flags, I just ignored them. Or I saw the red flags, but I deered them away. Deering stands for defend, excuse, explain, rationalize. If you catch yourself doing that, pay attention.
He was a business person coming in. We'd pass in the hallway. We'd be in the elevator, and I'd say hi, and he'd say hi. We were all tired from working and everything like that. But, you know, the building put out a memo to all the residents. And this is a memo, and it says, good afternoon, residents. Due to an active police investigation involving a resident, you may see and encounter law enforcement officials in and around the building over the next few days. Now, that is what alarmed a lot of residents to what was happening.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And that was
Well, I'm sorry, Geraldine, I'm sorry that, I was just going to say, I'm sorry that you and all of these residents sort of have come, you know, within arm's length of this very tragic story in Columbus. But I'm really appreciative for your, you know, first of all, your spidey senses to go upstairs and take a look, but also thanks for your perspective and your information about your neighbor. I do appreciate this tonight.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for having me on as a guest. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I just want to quickly apologize. Sometimes there's overspeak and it looks like I'm interrupting a guest, but when you're on live TV, there's a delay. And so sometimes I'll jump in on a pause and it just, they don't hear the pause and we're, you know, talking over each other.
I think that's partially true, but other times it was over talking as well.
Until one of us can just take it and run. So sometimes I'll just keep going to avoid that no you go, no you go, no you go moment. So anyway, my apologies if it felt like I was interrupting her, but it stands to reason that a suspect's digital footprint is almost always much, much bigger and more conclusive than his or her actual footprint, especially if an actual footprint is left behind at the murder scene. And you would,
I mean, this is true. I mean, clearly, a digital footprint, so much more of your life is in your digital footprint than it is your actual footprint. But you know what I would think the best descriptor is? The most valuable piece of information? Their relationship history. The relationship history and perhaps what their parents would say. Those, but in particular, their relationship history. That's the most important thing to look at, and what their exes would say.
think that somebody working towards a doctorate in criminology would certainly know that. Yes, Brian Koberger turned off his phone while killing 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho, but his phone pinged at that home 23 different times at the murder scene in the weeks leading up to the killings. He incidentally also stepped in blood with his shoe print, and you know the size of the shoe was able to be determined by investigators. So there's another one, right? But what are phones and cameras?
So his phone pinged 23 different times leading up to this, which makes you wonder, how the heck did he have time to do all of this, considering he lives so far away? Any theories, chat?
And watches and GPS. What are all those things going to tell the police in Ohio about the murders that are now linked to an Illinois surgeon. I talked to somebody on my News Nation show who knows all about this. Jennifer Coffendorfer is a retired FBI special agent, and she's been doing some Googling of her own and found some pretty interesting info. Here's our conversation.
Last week, Jen, you joined me on the show and you found.
So Brian Etten has Maureen, and Ashley here has Jennifer Coffendorfer.
That there was an inordinate spike in Google searches for the couple's home, and now before the murders. And now you have found even more Google searches before the murders and after the murders. So what have you found that's new before the murders?
So maybe I misspoke. She wasn't talking about Michael with the pings. She's talking about Brian Kohberger. So if so, then ignore what I just said about where did he have the time.
Right before the murders, Dr. Tepe, he was actually Google searched as well in an inordinate amount of time. In other words, everyone's flatlined, and then all of a sudden he spikes in November 30th. So that tells me that somebody was really looking into what he was doing.
What about the after murder searches? What did you find has spiked after the murders?
So after the murders and immediately after the murders, Michael McKee spiked. Now, that makes some sense, right? People thought that that could be him, but it continued to spike throughout. And when we look at Brian Kohberger, it's just such a mirror image of his spike pattern. Of course, that was in a time frame 5 weeks before anyone ever knew his name. I just found it very interesting. Was Michael McKee worried that people were looking at him? And so he was checking social media and so on.
Because it wasn't you and me. None of us actually had any idea that Mo Tepe had been married, a decade prior. And so we weren't Googling the name Dr. Michael McKee. Nobody in the true crime community really was doing that. So that is a fascinating find. Let me ask you this. The cops have put out the exact time that Mo and Spencer Tepe were murdered. And it's 3:52 a.m. How would they know the exact minute?
Well, I think that that's going to be based on the visual evidence from videotape that they have.
That's a great answer. And that's something we mentioned before, too. There's all sorts of security cameras in these homes now. And I would think the same applies to the Rob Reiner household, too, for that matter. As gruesome as that is to think about.
Going in and coming out. So I think that's how they have the precise time. It could also be from his cell phone. Now, this is what I find interesting, though, is they would have geofenced this property right away. And I don't understand why they wouldn't have had his name prior to that, unless, Ashley, he had a burner phone. And if he did, that makes sense to me that they have a precise time.
Here's what I'm thinking. It could be also a fitness tracker on any of the three of them, because the spike in the blood pressure and the heart rate at the time of the killings for all of them would have been through the roof. And so if any of them was wearing an Oura ring or an Apple Watch or anything like that, that could have shown. Or maybe there's just video somewhere that registered gunshots or sounds of gunshots. I have to leave it there because there's just so much information. Will you come back this week, Jen?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Jen was absolutely correct when she just said the security cameras. That would do it. That's enough to tell the time right there.
Ashley, thanks for having me.
So to help make sense of all of this and to get a clearer read on what is happening on the ground in Ohio, I sat down with someone who knows this case, who knows this state, and who knows this system inside and out. Anjanette Levy is the host of Crime Fix on Law and Crime, and she also has her own YouTube channel under her name, Anjanette Levy. She's an Ohio native. And since this story broke, people who know this case and people in this community have been reaching out to Anjanette and sharing what they're hearing and what they're seeing.
So we're going to listen to what Ashley has to say or hear from this woman. And then we're going to go over to Law and Crime Network, our buddy Chris Stewart.
As this case unfolds. What you're about to hear, I think, is a thoughtful and insightful conversation about two people who know the business of crime, crime fighting, and investigations and prosecutions. And I think that you're going to get a lot out of this. All of Anjanette's links are also in the description of this episode. And let me just tell you, Anjanette's got info from the inside. Like, she knows for a fact that this marriage was not good. And I'm going to get to why and all of the chatter around this and how Monique's parents may have been involved in helping her get away from her first husband, Dr. Michael McKee. But before I get to all of that, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I could not do this without you. You are my community, right? I also could not do this without my sponsors like Wild Grain. Have you had a chance to check out Wild Grain yet? I mean, seriously, this is the first bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas, and everything bakes in like 25 minutes or less. What is even better is that the ingredients in Wild Grain are real. You can really pronounce them, you know? That's good. I'm super obsessed with the sourdough bread. This is so elite during the chill of winter. And those boxes, they're all customizable. All right, back to the case and my conversation with Anjanette Levy. Anjanette, it's so great to have you on Drop Dead Serious. Thank you for this. I appreciate it. I wanted to get your reaction. I mean, you're local. This is your neck of the woods. What was your reaction to hearing about this arrest?
You know, I wasn't surprised that Michael McKee was actually arrested.
Just look at Idaho. Is that what that says? Is she going to confuse people with the Brian Kohberger?
After some information I received late Friday night, I was surprised that it happened the day that it did, because I was kind of hearing through the grapevine that it might take a while. So when it happened and I got a tip that it happened on Saturday, I was shocked. I was like, whoa, I wasn't shocked that it was him. I was shocked at the timing.
So pull on that thread. Pull on that thread a little about it might take a while. Like, how did you sort of know that they might be going in that direction?
I had just heard some rumblings, late Friday night, that maybe there was some testing, or, you know how these investigations unfold, especially these days. There's digital, evidence. There are all kinds of things that they gather. And I wasn't getting something super concrete about whether it was ballistics, whether it was just digital, a combination of both. But there was something going on, and that maybe it was going to take some time, that it wasn't going to be immediate. And then, boom, I was literally driving home from the pharmacy, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. So the name I was not surprised by, based on what I had, because earlier in the week I had heard, I had heard a lot of things. I've covered crime in Ohio for many years. I worked in local news covering crime, mostly in politics, a great deal. So I know a lot of people, had received quite a few phone calls, and some other messages and things like that. So, people were reaching out, and I had heard different things all week long. This was not, the name was not surprising. The timing was surprising.
And what's, just a little inside baseball here for everybody who's watching or listening. We get stuff all the time. We see stuff all the time. Stuff crosses our desks, the rumblings, the rumors. And there's a bar that has to be reached before you broadcast that,
right,
or before you pop that out on the podcasts or start talking about it publicly. And that can take a lot of time, and and sometimes you can never release it because you just can't get an official confirmation, even though you've heard it through the grapevine, even though you've got one source that's pretty good. It's just tricky. And so that's why when you see things like web sleuths and all the online chatter, they're a good start, but they're not the end. And obviously, these things are starting to come, into fruition. You worried about a gag order in this case?
It depends on the defense attorney. We don't know who his defense attorney is going to be yet when he gets to Columbus. Let's hope. This is a guy possibly of some means who could pay for an experienced defense attorney in Columbus, Ohio. And there are quite a few who are used to high-profile cases who I don't believe would ask for a gag order in a case like this.
Why? Wait, stop there. Any defense attorney.
Well, you know who's looking for work? Alan Jackson.
No matter how high profile you are, wants to keep things out of the press. Why do you think these guys wouldn't?
Well, I'm not saying they're going to be on the courthouse steps, leaking and granting press conferences and ranting. But there are some defense attorneys who maybe sometimes are more willing to share and more willing to, cooperate with the press than others. And I've had that experience over
Sharing is caring, after all.
the years. And then you come off something like Idaho where you get nothing. I mean, it's like shut it all down immediately, which I think is the wrong way to handle a high profile case. So, and I can say that based on going back 20 years of covering high profile cases, it's not
38
to deal with it. I'm had the same experience. It's not the right way to deal with it.
My first big high profile case was in Canada, and it was committed in the late 80s, early 90s. The committing of the crime and the prosecution, the investigation, all the rest. And the Canadians thought that the right idea was to completely shut all coverage down. Zero. Canadians were not allowed to know anything about the case at all. Americans, on the other hand, were allowed. So I worked in a newsroom where I had to ask my friends in the US to fax me newspaper headlines on the case. It was crazy. Even when it was in court, by the way.
Yeah.
Even when it was in court, we were banned across Canada from releasing any of the details in court. That's why the Americans would sit in court and then go and report. It was nuts. I mean, so yeah, I got a long hit PTSD about gag orders going back to when I was a kid.
I am not a fan of gag orders at all. And I have a little bit of that PTSD going back to the first big case I covered back in 2005 to 2007 in Wisconsin. It drives me insane. Sealed documents drives me insane.
Yeah.
The whole thing, closing court hearings drives me insane. So it very much gets my, I get very uptight about it.
There's a puritanical way of looking at this too, right? It's not just because, we got a dog in the fight. We're journalists and this is our lifeblood. It's really, for me anyway, it's about countries where I've been, where justice is hooded. I mean, I was in Iraq right before Saddam, and they were throwing, black bags over people's heads and throwing them in a gulag, and no one would ever see them again. And there'd never be a question about it, and no one you could ask. And so that's the direct antithesis of what we do. But there's a slow slide into secret justice. And so I'm very, very mindful of it.
Yeah. And I think that when the public can see the process, and they can see how it unfolds, especially when cameras are in there and they have access. They can log on and they can actually see the proceedings on the internet these days. They don't have to traipse on down to the courthouse and hope to get a seat. You can log on and watch it. You don't have to go to the television even. You can watch it on your phone. You can see what's going on. It's transparency. And I think that's just better.
Makes us
for
better
everybody
citizens.
Involved. And it keeps people from, spinning into, conspiracy theories and going down rabbit holes and the whole 9 yards. I mean, you're always going to have a little bit of that no matter what.
Sure.
But I think you have to always err on the side of transparency.
Yeah, it makes us better citizens if we're involved in the process. And if you keep us out, that just a dumb citizenry doesn't help anybody. Let me go to a couple things that I want to talk to you about. And I'm going to just preface our conversation by, we don't have absolute confirmation on a lot of this stuff. Some of this stuff we'll be referencing as chatter, as rumor, as discussions, as background, as things I've heard I can't say, things like that. But the family and their reaction to the arrest of Dr. McKee. I had, a brother-in-law on the air a week ago and asked specifically, do you have any idea who may be behind this or may have wanted the Teppes dead? And his answer was,
not that I'm at liberty to say or able to speak on. Let's see what she says.
Was interesting. I thought it was definitive. Looking back, I think there's more nuance to it. Rob, do you or your family members have any idea who might have been capable of doing this? Did your family have any enemies? Did Spencer and Monique have any enemies at all that are?
He's going to say, not that I'm able to speak on, and then he's going to say something else.
Known?
Not that I can speak on or know of. I know that they've had this massive community around him that they were.
Not that I can speak on is much different than not that I know of. But his first one was, I think, what was going on. He didn't feel like he could speak on the stalking and whatever else was going on and the debacle of Monique leaving him the first time. Michael.
They were just so well liked and admired by everyone. You can see in this picture. That's kind of defines them. They were always smiling. They were always laughing. So it's really just unbelievable and shocking to all of us when we found out. I still, a week later, still doesn't feel real. I can't believe I'm like here talking about this. So
given that answer, do you think that the families of Mo and Spencer may have had an inkling about Dr. McKee before the arrest?
I think it's very possible.
Not just very possible, definitely, because if you look at that divorce between Monique and Michael, and you need to get your family to come get you out of there, clearly there's something going on. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's the stalking or cyber stalking that Monique mentioned. And it would also make the pieces of the puzzle fit together that after only an hour of Spencer being late to the office, that people were already calling 911 and then specifically saying it's even more concerning. We can't get a hold of Monique. It puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. They're concerned about this guy. Spencer knew. Monique knew. Monique's family knew. Spencer's office knew. It adds up, right? It makes sense.
I think that these were people who were in a state of shock as this was unfolding, but also may have had their suspicions. I think that obviously Monique, she got out of this marriage very quickly. I mean, she had dated McKee for a couple of years before they got married. They started dating in 2012, got married in August of 2015. They separate like months later, 7 months later or so. And then the divorce is not, filed until 2017. So it's very possible, I think, that they may have had some suspicions, but they weren't going to broadcast that.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Nobody wants to, point the finger at somebody for a double murder if they're just, wondering
Absolutely
if it's
not.
an ex,
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't even know that she had an ex-husband at the time. Like it came out very late that she had this ex-husband. And I'm sort of curious about what you know about.
It didn't really come out late. Like the second we started going over the story, we heard about it. We had said, oh yeah, she was married for 2 years to this guy, no kids. And then she moved on.
Their breakup, because on paper it doesn't look so bad. It just looks as though they had an uncontentious divorce. They separated the assets, and that's that. But there's chatter that suggests otherwise.
And I've heard some chatter that it was not a good marriage. That's what I've heard. That she was not happy. They were living in Virginia for a time, and she was not happy in the marriage. He may not have been kind to her in some respects. And that's kind of what I've been hearing some chatter about. And there was a reason that she wanted out of that marriage.
Right. And truth and transparency, we went over this yesterday, right? We talked about how Monique was going back and forth on whether she should even marry him to begin with. And to me, I'll say it again. If you're really that unsure about someone, that's your answer. The person that's right for you, you're not going to be unsure. Just keep it at that. Also, then they were saying how Michael was threatening Monique and saying things like, I'm going to move in right next door to you. And what does that sound like? A guy who is narcissistic and is basically treating her like a possession. Oh, I own you. I can still live right next door to you. You're never going to get out of my control. And of course, when she did get out of his control, he couldn't tolerate that. So he said, you know what? I'll show you. And not only will I show you, I'll show your husband too.
And he did not want the marriage to end. I can safely say that. That's why this took so long. And she, they got a private judge that usually expedites the process. But keep in mind, the separation happened in 2016. And, the documents weren't filed until 2017.
Yeah, like 14 months later, the divorce is finalized. But so interesting that we know definitively he didn't want this to end. She wanted out. That's the dynamic of the end of the relationship.
That's what I've learned.
Okay. There's also chatter, and again, it's chatter. There's nothing to back this up officially from the police or from family at this point. But I'm just wondering if you've heard the same thing, or if you're seeing any evidence to back this up, that she may have been in fear of him and may have lived with her parents for a time, and that her parents may have had to step in and help in, actualizing this divorce.
I don't know about the living with the parents part, but I've heard some reliable information that they may have helped her get out of Virginia, where she was living with him, and get her so she could get back to Ohio.
Well, it'll all at some point make sense, and I'm sure a lot of these pieces and a narrative will evolve, but it would make sense completely given what's happened if Dr. McKee is guilty. I mean, all of that would make perfect sense, right? It would just fit the narrative. Let's talk a little bit about what police would have done right after they discovered these two dead bodies. Clearly, they would have a handle on the fact that she had a prior husband, and it would stand to reason that any detective worth his or her weight in salt would call that ex within hours. What do you expect happened here?
Oh, I'm sure. I don't know if it was within hours, but I think that they probably spoke with McKee, with Dr. McKee, and I think they were given a story and an alibi. And it's my understanding that alibi did not hold up under scrutiny. And so you know how these things.
So that's another clue, right? Besides just the car, then this is the one piece of new information I didn't hear. So they called him, they asked his alibi, or he gave an alibi, and his alibi didn't hold up. That's a pretty good clue.
Go, Ashley. Somebody says they're in one place, but these days, no matter what you do, they can still figure things out.
Well,
and so
holy cow. I mean, I just cannot wait to hear that conversation or to see a transcript of what might have transpired between police detectives and Dr. McKee on their very first encounter, because so much of what might have been said will be locked, right? That's going to be locked in. And then any evidence that doesn't fit, I mean, a defense attorney is going to be stuck. Well, this is what you said to the cops on day one. Now I can't say you've never been in the house, or, let's just say, no, I've never been there. If Mike McKee said, I've never been to that house, I've never stepped foot in that house, and suddenly he's got DNA in the house. Now there's no way to explain it away. And if he'd never said that to the police, he could have a story where I stopped by and I gave them Christmas presents, or I stopped by to meet the kids, and that was a while ago. So sure, my DNA's in the house. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I'm dying to hear. What was the first story given? And was there a second story given upon arrest?
Well, I don't know that there was a story given upon arrest, because I think you have to keep in mind, these documents, the complaint was filed, if you look at it, at 10:57 a.m. in Ohio. He was booked into the jail in Winnebago County in Illinois, I think shortly after noon. So there's an hour time difference.
Super fast.
I don't think there was any time for much more of a chat. And so in court, they said that he had, they were invoking his right to remain silent again. So I'm assuming he didn't give another statement. I don't know that for certain, but it's my understanding that he gave an alibi. It didn't hold up once they started kind of really looking at things. And, if you say you're in Illinois and then they are able to determine that, hey, you were actually in Ohio, hundreds of miles away. That's a big problem. You have some explaining to do.
So many ways that could be determined too, right, Anjanette? So we've got your Fitbit, Apple Watch, whatever, your Waze, your Google Maps. Everything is taking you on this journey. Your gas that you had to fill up because it's 12 hours of driving, your toll tag, your GPS on your car, your phone, anything like that. So there's so many things that can, that a learned person you think would know, but like you said, when it's your first rodeo, you might not think of all these things. This is usually what trips up smart people. Even Koberger, as a criminologist, screwed up.
Well, let's keep in mind too, the thing that keeps getting me in the complaint, or the affidavit, I should say, which, is pretty bare bones. That's kind of how they do it in Ohio. They sometimes you'll get something a little longer, but a lot of times in Ohio, you just get maybe like a page. So we got 2 paragraphs in the murder one. We don't have the aggravated murder one yet because they did bump up the charges on Sunday, but that remains sealed until he gets here.
And by the way, isn't that just because it's a burglary? I mean, just they really only have to add the burglary to get to aggravated.
Well, no, it could be that, but also, there's more than one person involved in this. So sometimes that's it, but it's also the premeditation part of that. In Ohio, premeditation, if you look at the charge, there are a number of different aggravating factors in the state of Ohio, and it can be prior calculation and design.
Okay.
That can be part of it. So I think the premeditation is part of it.
Well, that would tell you they've got something that has him planning the trip and making the trip and fueling up or digital.
Clearly he made the trip. And clearly, from what we know, it was his car that was there right before and left right after.
Registering along
but I guess they don't know if it was a rental car or his actual car, right?
The way that he's making this very long journey.
But they said in the probable cause affidavit that they linked him through video surveillance and the vehicle. And so I'm thinking to myself, did they ping him through license plate readers all the way from Columbus to Illinois? I don't know that, but that's one of my thoughts.
Toll tags and license plate readers are all on. I think it's I-80. Somebody mentioned I-80 is the big. My bet.
Yeah, I mean, between the car and his alibi not holding up, that's all you needed. That's all you needed. Let's go to our other friends.
It's a shocking case of an ex-husband allegedly killing the woman he once married who had moved on with her life. Michael McKee is now in jail, and that's a stark contrast to the lifestyle that he has been living as a surgeon living in a luxury building in Chicago. How strong a case prosecutors have against him at this point, it's unclear. But we are learning more about the past and the relationship that he had with Monique Tepe. What do the documents that we have from their divorce tell us about any possible motive for what Michael McKee is now accused of doing? We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, real quick before we start this episode of On the Case, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered 20 at the divorce that may be at the center of this double murder case that we have been following out of Ohio. It's a divorce that came roughly 2 years after this picture was taken. It was taken in 2015, and this is a picture from the wedding day of Michael McKee and the woman named Monique Sabatersky, who would go on to be Monique Tepe. Now, Michael McKee is in custody. He is accused in Monique's murder as well as the murder of the man who she went on to marry after she divorced McKee. His name is Spencer Tepe. He was a dentist in Ohio. McKee is facing 2 counts of aggravated murder. He's accused of killing Spencer Tepe and Monique Tepe inside their home in Columbus, Ohio on December 30th in the middle of the night, shooting them both allegedly multiple times, then driving hours back to Illinois, the state where he works as a vascular surgeon. Now, there is so much that we don't know about this case at this point, but we do know more now about the divorce between Michael McKee and Monique. Now, both of them went to Ohio State for college. They were both 39 years old. And after his undergraduate degree, Michael continued on at OSU, graduating from the med school there in 2014. Monique and McKee married on August 22nd, 2015. And there is that wedding picture once again from that day. Now, after they were married, they left Ohio and they moved to Virginia. That's where Michael continued his training to become a vascular surgeon. He did his residency in Roanoke at a medical college there. Now, Monique and Michael owned a home in Virginia, but even though the couple were supposed to be starting their forever lives together, this marriage was not going well pretty early. On May 2nd, 2017, Monique filed for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. That is where Columbus is located. Now, we have the complaint. That reads that at the time that she filed for divorce, she had been living in Ohio for more than 6 months, and McKee was still living in Virginia, continuing his surgical residency. The complaint goes on to say that the couple did not have any children together, and Monique wasn't pregnant at the time that she filed for divorce. Now, the reason she was filing, quote, plaintiff states that the parties are incompatible. Now, we don't know much more at this point about what made that marriage so incompatible. It appears that McKee and Monique dated for a couple of years.
I can tell you, my speculation would be that Michael is a very narcissistic person, maybe even worse, maybe antisocial, maybe throw in some dark tetrad or what should be included in the dark five. What's the word for five? Triad, tetrad, and then what? I don't know. But dark triad is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. The tetrad, you add sadism. The five, you add paranoia. And what's it like to be in a relationship with a narcissistic person? Well, in the beginning, usually there's a love bombing period where they future fake. They act like you're going to be their soulmate. They act like the person that it's always what you've wanted. Everything you've always wanted in a person, they'll be. They'll mirror and match your likes and dislikes, and usually they rush. Now, if you look at their timeline, they didn't look like they rushed. Like, that's the one thing that was different. It didn't seem like there was a rush in that way. But usually narcissistic people will rush because not out of any sense of romanticism, but it's because the closer they get to you, the more power and control and influence they have over you. So very often they might rush to move in with you or get you pregnant or get married for those reasons. They'll say it's romantic, but often it's really just about power, control, influence. And so that's how it went. And then at some point, the mask starts to come off. And at this time, it's probably might have even happened before the wedding because she was so uncertain about it. She was going back and forth. But definitely once they were married, that mask didn't stay up long. And then there's devaluing, belittling, always blaming her for everything, probably starting to blame her for everything going on in his life. And even so, it's still all about control, though, too. He'll act like he's so miserable, but he won't break up with her. And so it was her who did that. They call that a reverse discard, where they'll treat you terribly. They'll blame you for everything. They'll value you, belittle you, insult you, be passive aggressive, put you down, but then they won't end the relationship. Why? Because they want to be able to play the victim. And when the other person breaks up or ends the marriage, then someone like Michael will say, see, she left me. She left me high and dry. I did everything for her. And he probably spread smear campaigns about her, the usual things. But that's what people like him do. And if that was his story with Monique, it would not surprise me one bit.
Least before they were married. This is a picture that we found of them together at a water park with friends in 2013. It's unclear what happened in their marriage to cause Monique to live after a little more than 6 months.
And this is a very good question there. I'll put it on the screen for people to see. But what about a conservative Catholic narcissist? So there's plenty of religious narcissists out there. And what they will do is they will use their religion as an excuse to control people. and they'll use it as an excuse to force people to forgive them, or they'll use it as an excuse to belittle others, and they'll say, you're not as good of a Christian as me. Or another good example of it is Tony Soprano, right? Tony Soprano will lie, cheat, murder, gamble. But then when Carmela wants to get a divorce, he'll say, I'm a Catholic. I don't believe in divorce. So granted, Tony Soprano is not very religious at all, but he would use it as an excuse to try to control Carmela. So that's what. Now, I wouldn't consider Tony Soprano a real religious narcissist. He's just someone that used it conveniently. But there are truly religious narcissists, people that might be pastors or priests, and they can be the worst. They can be very grandiose. Sometimes they can be covert too, by the way. But they'll use their religion as a way to be superior, and it feeds their grandiosity, and they'll judge people. They'll say, they'll look down their nose at people. Oh, you're not as good of a Christian as me. And it's really obnoxious. Unpleasant and obnoxious.
Of being married and for them moving from Ohio to Virginia. Roughly a month and a half after Monique filed that divorce document in Ohio court, this divorce was granted on June 16th, 2017. And this here is the divorce decree. It reads, quote, the parties are incompatible, and as such, the wife is entitled to a divorce. It goes on to say, quote, the marriage contract existing between husband and wife is hereby terminated, and the parties are hereby released from any obligation of the same except as set forth in the separation agreement. Now, you can see on that day in June, both Monique and McKee signed the document ending their marriage. We have the separation agreement. This is what lays out some of the details of the divorce. And this line here caught my eye, considering what McKee is now accused of. It goes, quote, each party shall have a right to privacy in their individual residences, except as allowed herein, neither party shall enter the residence of the other without permission of the resident's spouse, and only.
And this is what we were talking about yesterday, right? This is an automatic add-on in Ohio, which is why that Michael didn't have a criminal record. This automatic thing. Each party shall have a right to privacy in their individual residences, except as allowed. Herein, neither party shall enter the residence of the other without permission of the resident's spouse, and only with prior approval. Husband and wife may and shall be free from interference, authority, and control, direct or indirect, by the other, fully as if she or he were single and unmarried. Important to know.
With prior approval, husband and wife may and shall be free from interference, authority, and control, direct or indirect, by the other, fully as if she or he were single and unmarried. Now, perhaps that is standard wording for cases like this, but still it's perhaps a shad for. Now, perhaps that wording in a document like this, it's standard for cases like a divorce, but it's still a sad foreshadowing for what allegedly happened inside Monique's home on December 30th. Now, as far as physical property, McKee got to keep the house that the couple lived in Roanoke, Virginia, and each got to keep their vehicles. Now, this, in the eyes of the court, was a pretty quick and amicable divorce compared to how others have gone. We did notice in Ohio court records, though, that there was an entry in their case from June of last year, 2025, and there was a hearing that was listed for September, but it is unclear what that hearing was for, what that entry was about. Now, other than that, it appeared that Monique.
And what do you think that was about? Was it maybe like an attempt to get a restraining order or something by Monique? Maybe she was thinking about filing charges for stalking or being cyber stalked. I don't know. But what do you think, chat?
Monique and McKee, they went their separate ways, that they had moved on with their lives. Now, as far as McKee's concerned, he continued his training to become a vascular surgeon. He made stops in Maryland and Nevada. He also had an active surgeon license in California, and he had one that was active in Illinois. At the time of his arrest, he was living alone in an apartment in a luxury building in Chicago called the Pierre. It's in Lincoln Park, really nice neighborhood in Chicago. He also worked at a medical center in Rockford, Illinois. That's an hour and a half west of Chicago. And that medical center says it is cooperating with law enforcement since one of the...
So is that true? Truth and Transparency said that was only a clerical error. That whole thing. That thing in June was a clerical error. Confirm that, so in case I don't want to be given errors.
Their surgeons have been arrested. I did speak with one of McKee's neighbors, actually, and she said that she never really saw him with anyone, but does that mean the guy was a loner? Not necessarily. It was a building full of a lot of working professionals, people living alone who, well, maybe might not have people around.
Okay, so it was someone working for the courts. He opened the Monique and Michael file, but he meant to open another file, or her. And so that's what it was. Okay. Just so we know. So it's nothing.
Around on a daily basis when they come and go from work. But still, she did say that she and the rest of the people who lived in that building are just in shock for what the man that they at least passed in the hallway is now accused of doing. Now, as far as Monique, it appears that she really flourished after her divorce from Michael McKee. She met Dr. Spencer Tepe after the divorce. Tepe was a dentist. He was a fellow graduate of Ohio State, and the two of them lived in this really nice, modern-looking townhome in Columbus. And according to friends, they were the life of the party. They loved bringing people together into their home and having fun. Monique was a stay-at-home mom to the couple's two children.
Monique sure does have, and Spencer, they have a lot of well-produced videos of them. Is this all from the wedding footage? And by the way, to any of my fellow creators out there, don't play the Monique and Spencer wedding footage that has music. I got copyright struck for that yesterday, and I think that was on Truth and Transparency's show. So watch out for that. Don't play that.
Ages 4 and 1. And if there's an example of how much the Tepes were loved, I want you to just think about how many people called 911 the day that they went missing on December 30th.
Columbus Police, Tech 107.
Yes, I would like to ask for a wellness check on an individual at their home.
So that was the first call that came in. It was from Spencer's boss at his dental office about 75 miles away from Columbus in Athens, Ohio. The boss said he was in Florida on vacation, but when Dr. Tepe didn't show up for work, he was getting calls from his employees that were really concerned about him. This was around 9 o'clock in the morning, and people wanted to know where Dr. Tepe was. And this was before people realized that we were dealing with something so dark and disturbing. Police received several calls from coworkers and friends of the Tepes as soon as anyone had an indication that something wasn't right.
Okay, what's the emergency there? Police or medical?
Maybe both, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of doing the
We
wellness.
already had a call out there. They knocked on the front door and back door multiple times, and there was no answer.
Yeah, no answer. I can hear kids inside, and I swear I think I heard one yell, but we can't get in. At this point, I don't know if I need to break the door in or just get in the house or what. So.
Okay, were you out there when the police was out there?
I wasn't. I just got here about 5 minutes ago.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll send them back out to you.
There was so much concern that a friend decided that it was time to go to the Tepes' house and actually went into the Tepes' home. And that is the person who allegedly found Spencer's body in a room.
There's a body. Our friend wasn't answering his phone. We just did a wellness check. We just came here, and he appears dead. Okay. There's blood. He's laying next to his bed, off of his bed, and there's blood. I can't get closer to see more than that.
Okay, so you can tell he's obviously not breathing or anything.
Yeah.
Is it like kind of like puddle, like, you know? Does he look like?
It doesn't. It's puddled. I can't look.
Okay. All right. Understand. Okay. And then when was the last time somebody spoke to him?
Yesterday, I suppose.
Yesterday. Okay. Yeah. How old is he?
37.
37. Okay. Is he like a drug user or anything like that?
No.
Okay. All right. Just that's a really young age.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay. All right. We're on our way.
Now, we don't know an alleged motive at this point. Why would Michael McKee allegedly drive from Illinois to Columbus days after Christmas, a day before New Year's Eve, enter his ex-wife's home in the middle of the night, shoot her and her husband multiple times, and with their young children in the home? Now, again, those children are unharmed. McKee, after this crime, police say, then allegedly drove back to Illinois, just hours of driving for a crime that is just so horrific. And we'll see what the case is that's laid out against him as this story goes on. Police say they tracked McKee with neighborhood video surveillance to a car that was registered to him, and it was that vehicle that arrived shortly before the shootings in the early morning hours of December 30th, and then it returned to Illinois shortly after. And it's unclear where exactly McKee was arrested in Rockford, Illinois last weekend between Friday and Saturday. He was being held in the county jail in Rockford. And it's, again, unclear where he was arrested because there's the address that's listed in Chicago. And then we know that he worked at that medical facility in Rockford. Now, here he is entering court in Rockford, Illinois this week. His hearing, it was very quick. It was an extradition hearing, lasted less than 3 minutes. He walked in, not a lot of emotion on his face. His hands were shackled. He was in a jail jumpsuit. He was, at this point, being represented by a public defender, and he waived his right to extradition. So that means he is going to return to Ohio to face the charges that he allegedly killed the Teppes. McKee, just not a lot of emotion on his face. He was asked what his name was. He said it pretty calmly in response. Listen to this.
Your name, sir, for the record? Michael McKee.
Now, after the hearing, McKee shook the hands of his public defender, and then he was taken out of the courtroom. His lawyer.
So that's the answer. The public defender for now. So he'll probably hire one, though.
Told the local newspaper in Rockford that she is expecting him to return to Ohio sometime this week, and he is expected to plead not guilty to those charges. Join us now to talk more about this part of the case is family law attorney Randy Kessler. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, and then when we have a case that involves a divorce, you can really help us understand what we're looking at in these documents. I know you read through the same documents that we have that have been released by people, authorities in Columbus. Just what stands out to you about how this divorce went down?
So, I'm never surprised, right? People have asked me, is it weird because it was such an uncontested, simple divorce that there could be some...
This dude looks like Mark Levin meets Lucky Louie, if anyone knows who those two are.
Hostility between the parties and that he could be angry at her. No, that's not weird. Sometimes people want out so badly, they just walk away from stuff they'd be entitled to. But I read the documents, and you all have them, and thank you for sharing them with me, and I read them. It seems pretty straightforward. He got the house, they each got their car, they each pay their own attorneys, and they walk away. What it sounds to me like is they both wanted out, and they didn't want to pay lawyers and didn't want to mess. Or she wanted out because she filed for divorce, and there was nothing for him to fight about, right? There were no kids. She was giving him the house. She sort of was smart if she wanted out. She said, you keep the house, you keep your car, I'll pay my own lawyer. So yes, it might have been uncontested, but there's no way to tell what's behind the scenes. What was she really feeling? How was it? It was not an acrimonious divorce. It was not an expensive divorce. Doesn't mean there weren't a lot of bad feelings. Even in the simplest divorce, sometimes there's some bad feelings underneath it all.
Yeah, and they were young, so it's not like they have massive stock portfolios and where things can get really messy. They didn't have kids, but they were living together in Virginia while he was doing his residency there. But she, at the time that she filed divorce, she was living, it appears, with family back in Ohio, and he was still in Virginia. And she's awarded the divorce for the couple being incompatible. And I think we all know what that word means.
So AJ might even be a little bit out of Michael's price range. I mean, Michael's wealthy, but I don't know if he's Alan Jackson wealthy. That's borderline.
And then have probably seen relationships where you would describe it that way. But legally, what does that necessarily mean when you're talking about a divorce and it being something that a divorce is rewarded for?
So that's the default. Every state now has, you've heard no fault divorce. That doesn't mean fault doesn't matter. In some states, like in Georgia, adultery matters a lot. It can be a bar to alimony. So you can bring up the fault or the grounds. But really, all it means is that if one side says to the judge, Judge, my marriage is over, I find it incompatible, or it's irretrievably broken, or I know there are irreconcilable differences, there's nothing the other side can do to prevent the divorce. The judge has to give a divorce on those no fault grounds. So that's what they're saying is, it doesn't matter what the reason for the divorce was. One party has declared that it's incompatible, and now the legislature in our state, in each state, has decided that it's okay to do that. And actually, there are a few states, I think Mississippi is one of them, that you might actually have to prove the reason for it. But in most states, like in Ohio, you can say, my marriage, me and him are just incompatible. And the judge says, well, that entitles you to a divorce. So the judge doesn't need to know the other reasons as long as one side says it's incompatible.
When it comes to, in the way that it was phrased, was something along the lines of like she was awarded the divorce because they were incompatible.
So on a side note, not related to the video, I did used to live on a haunted farm. And if you go back years ago in some of my YouTube videos, I think there was an ASMR soft-spoken thing I did. And someone mentioned in the comments, and this video is still up, they said, is your house haunted? And I said, you know, I have my wonders. I wonder myself. And I asked them why. And they said, well, I see a man smiling in the window behind you. And I looked at it, and it looked like a guy smiling with a top hat and glasses. And I was like, yeah, I see that too. But there was another thing where I've seen an imp in the trees. I learned that's what they're called. And I literally took a picture of it, and I still have that picture. But to me, it was unmistakable. Now, but here's the thing about it, though. Not everyone can see it. Certain people that are a little more inclined can see it. For example, I showed my friend who was diagnosed with schizophrenia that didn't think he had schizophrenia, but he was diagnosed as that. He's the guy that was battling with the devil. I showed him the picture, and he saw it instantly. He saw this thing instantly. So I was like, all right. But then other people you show, they don't see it. I'll circle it and do whatever. Some people see it instantly, and the other people just can't see it. It's weird.
And she was living in Ohio. You know, again, he's in Virginia, and this divorce played out in Ohio court. What does that tell you about whether both parties, I guess, what kind of cooperation from both sides do you need to have for a divorce to go forward?
So the words are always interesting to me. You know, you're awarded a divorce, or when you ask the court for relief, it's called your prayers for relief. It's like you're praying, judge, give me this relief. So I don't read a lot into the words. They're both awarded a divorce. They're both granted a divorce. But as far as who cooperated, she filed the divorce. So she was awarded her relief. It's like if I sued you for $10,000 and I won, I'm awarded $10,000. So she was awarded the divorce. But in this case, he also was awarded a divorce. All a divorce is the status. So the judge said, your status is now unmarried. You're now divorced. But as far as who was cooperative, it looks, from my vantage point, like they both cooperated. They used this private judge or private mediator. They spelled out what they wanted to happen. He got the house. He had all the debt related to the house. They each got their cars. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of friction, a lot of fighting, a lot of expense in this divorce. If you just asked me and threw the papers on my desk, I'd say, this looks simple compared to, you know, most divorces. I wouldn't expect that there'd be, you know, more fighting. If somebody was mad or angry, they could drag the other one through the mud just for the sake of doing it, right? He could have said, I'm not going to sign anything, even if you give me the house, because I don't want you to get a divorce and go move in with somebody else. That didn't happen. So from the outsider's point of view, it looks like a pretty straightforward, uncontested, amicable, friendly divorce.
And amicable was the word that was used by a lot of media outlets in the, you know, days after.
Now, I don't agree with what he just said at all. He said, oh, it's an amicable divorce. Maybe they just don't know the same information that Truth and Transparency Channel knows. But when you have to run away while Michael's at work and have your family help you get a U-Haul so you can escape, would you call that an amicable divorce? Do you call it an amicable divorce when they threaten to live right next door to you? I don't think so.
After, you know, these murders happen, because, you know, everybody and of course the true crime community figured out pretty quickly that she had been married in the past. And we've all seen the stories where it's like, oh, well, the ex-husband did it. But then there was just not a lot there for days when, you know, not a lot of comments from him. You know, you knew he was the surgeon and he lived out of state. And then this, you know, the arrest is made and everything changes. When it comes to the divorce, and we don't know a lot, and I'm not speculating that there was this, but like if there were accusations of violence or abuse or anything like that in the past, how often is that included in a document even if the grounds are incompatible being the reason that the divorce was given, because this was very straightforward. It's kind of incompatible. He gets this, she gets this, they go their separate ways, but there's not a lot of detail as far as what those issues were, where once they got married, they were incompatible and this marriage needed to come to an end.
So it's not common that they're in there, and they weren't in there in this case. In fact, it's the professional thing to do. And I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, my husband, my wife has done some horrible things. And our suggestion is always, let's not put it in the paperwork. Let's not blow it up. Let's say that we want the marriage because it's the divorce because it's broken or because it's incompatible. And if it gets ugly, we still have the right to amend, and we still have the right to go back and say, all right, Judge, now we're going to tell you what really was going on. But why throw it out there just to muddy the waters? You also lose your leverage. It's nice for my client to be able to say to her husband or his wife, look, I could have put all this ugly stuff in the paperwork. I'm trying to just resolve this peacefully. So just because there were peaceful papers and there was not a lot in there, doesn't mean there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. So, there are lawyers, there are clients who say, I don't care what you think. I want you to put in there that my husband was an adulterer, that my wife did this or whatever it is. But that wasn't the case here. So was it behind the scenes? Maybe, but it wasn't in the paperwork.
And when we look at, you go on the Franklin County, Ohio court records, and you can take a look at kind of the different entries there as far as their case. And you have this, marriage in 2017. And as far as divorces go, I mean, you're the professional, but it seems like this one went pretty smoothly, pretty quickly as far as how long some of these proceedings can go on for. And then there's several years where there's nothing going on because the divorce was finalized. But then I see this line in there that says that there was an entry in June for a hearing in September, and there's not a lot of detail beyond that.
And this is just a clerical error, so you can disregard everything he says about this.
What may that be?
I don't know, sort of like that comment that's in the news. Like, where did that come from? What is that? All of us analysts and all of us that are looking at this story are wondering what it is. And of course, it could be 1,000 things. It could be.
And that's what makes this channel so great, by the way. We go over every one of these channels that do their due diligence, and we get all the perspectives. And here is where you find the information that even Law and Crime Network here doesn't know, because they perhaps don't do all the digging that we do. And I appreciate the people in the chat that tell me about all the new channels that are out there as well. They told us about Truth and Transparency yesterday, and she's on it. So well done. That's what you get here. That's why you should subscribe to the channel.
That somebody forgot to sign a deed and now they're selling the house and they realize that her name is still on the deed and they have to go back to court to get the judge to order her to transfer it or to get the judge to transfer it. We have cases like that where we're asking the judge to do it. Maybe there was, some bank account information that wasn't transferred appropriately, or the car title wasn't transferred appropriately. And they're saying, Judge, the other side didn't do what they were supposed to. So can you, as a judge, order the bank to let me pay off the loan or let me have that money? It could be something as simple as that. It's with no children involved, it's rarely something like we're going to change the agreement. You can't really change an agreement years later. You know about law, res judicata. When something's decided, it's decided. That's it. It's an effectuation and enforcement type of proceeding in all likelihood.
And just looking at this case in general, and this was a marriage that was over roughly a decade ago, and they moved on with their lives. It seems like he goes to become a surgeon, and continues. You got to go to school for like 15 years for that job, and then she moves on and meets Spencer Tepe, and they build what seems like a great life together. They have kids. And sadly, we've seen violence before after marriages come to an end. But I mean, in this case, what do you make of that? And we don't know what type of communication he had with her and, what interactions they had over the years since the marriage came to an end. But just what do you make of the time that just passed between the marriage ending and then now he is accused of these murders?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a mental health aspect. I mean, usually you're right. It's that passion murder. I caught my wife cheating and I just reacted and I shot the guy. And I shouldn't have done it. If that's what it usually comes down to, right? The immediate reaction. Maybe it was latent. Maybe it was, he's a doctor. She married another doctor. She's moving on with her life. She's happy.
And again, this guy's a lawyer. He doesn't understand psychology. That's what is special about this channel too. As I sound grandiose, but when you understand the psychological component, like I do, and then you put their behavior through the narcissism cluster B lens, and then all these behaviors start to make sense, that's not a coincidence. So nursing of the grudges, envious, not being able to tolerate losing control, that's what it sounds like to me.
My experience, after divorce, usually one side is happier and able to move on.
Thank you very much for this, No Way. I appreciate the super sticker. I appreciate your support as well. Thanks for being here. We got a great flock of black sheep here. I'm very proud of the community that we've built here.
On a lot better than the other side, and that's a sadness for me. I wish that both sides could move on just fine and both be okay with it, but somebody usually wants out more than the other one, and usually they get over it, but hurt lingers, right? And even in the best, friendliest divorce, people still have regret and anger and frustration. This might have just been building up, and who knows what else he had going on in his life. If he's the one who did this, maybe he just said, you know what? I've had a miserable life since the divorce, and had she not divorced me, had she not met him, had she not married him, had she not been happy, we could have been there. I could have been that person. I mean, I'm speculating. I have no idea, but that's, stranger things have happened. It is strange that it took so long, if that's what it was. But, the human mind is an interesting thing.
It really is. I mean, I even think of if he is guilty of this and he drove from Illinois several hours through the night to do this, at any point in time, he could have pulled over and just been like, what am I doing? And turn around. But instead he moves forward, and there's a lot of details that we have yet to learn about how he got into the home and some of the other aspects of this case. For you, as you've been following this and we're waiting for more details to come out, it's expected he's going to plead not guilty and fight these charges. I mean, what are some of the big questions that you just have as everyone has been following this for the last week?
So it's the question that doesn't really matter to the legal system, right? Motive. We don't need to prove motive. You just have to prove that the person did it. But, motive is what answers the question, what lets a jury feel better about convicting somebody. Even if the facts are all there, they want to know.
And that's a good point there, Brian. When you hear anyone say, and I'm hesitant to say this because it can be true in some cases, but, oh, you've ruined my life. You've ruined my life. Often a blame shifting thing to say. Now, perhaps though, if you're, in retrospect, you're Spencer and Monique, yeah, their ex did ruin their life. Not only ruin it, they ended it. So sometimes it's true. And sometimes the victims, they can come pretty close to having their lives ruined. But often you'll see the cluster B folks, they'll be the ones blaming others for everything going on in their lives. But it's not true. It's just them refusing to take accountability.
But could he have done it? Why would he have done it? I want to know why. I mean, we don't need to prove premeditation. You can put in his GPS or his Waze search that routes the route to her house, and that's premeditation, right? The question is, to me, why did it take so long? What was it? And I am curious, Chris, you're right about that last document. What was it? Was there something about the divorce? Maybe he had put it aside. He had moved along, and then something, triggered a memory that, oh yeah, she's still fighting me about this stupid little thing. Enough is enough is enough. And he snapped. I mean, the why is what's interesting to me. It's what's interesting to everybody, even if you don't have to prove it to get a conviction. I think they should try to prove the why. They need to tell the jury, why would this guy have done this? He's already moved on. She's moved on. Why?
Well, and the other part too, just kind of on, with whatever that entry is from this year, maybe it's a clerical thing. When someone gets divorced, is that ever just, I know it's finalized, but it's like, they move on with their lives. And then suddenly there's an entry in this case that hasn't been touched for 6 years, 7 years, or however it was. Like, is there ever a time where it's like, okay, we're signing off on this. You go your way, I go my way. And then there's we're done. There's no more like entering motions or anything like that. There's no more of this.
It's supposed to be like that, right? There's, in extraordinary circumstances, most states have laws that let you go back for extraordinary fraud or extraordinary misconduct. But yes, it's supposed to be done because you have a right to move on with your life. It's the concept of statutes of limitations. But this takes me outside the law. It almost smells and tastes and feels like PTSD, right? You've been in war, you've been in battle, and you put it behind you, and all of a sudden you see something that just triggers a memory. And maybe that's what it is. But to answer your question, yes, most divorces are gone, sealed, done. In New Orleans, all the divorces before Katrina, there's no record of them. There's nothing you can do, right? The paperwork was gone.
Yeah.
So eventually the clerk's office is allowed to clean house, and be done with the paperwork. And only when there are children involved do you get to come back and say, well, something's changed. We need to change custody or change support because the situation has changed and there's still a family. But when there are no children involved, the divorce is over. It's done unless there's some obvious extraordinary fraud that could not have been discovered but for some new event.
Well, what I would say is there can be cases where stalking or cyber stalking or harassment becomes a thing. And then maybe you try to get a restraining order. And any kind of abusive relationship where there's a trauma bond. And for those who don't know, a trauma bond is a bond you form with someone who is abusing and mistreating you. And I couldn't believe it the other day, but someone was trying to tell me that's a form of victim blaming, saying it's a trauma bond. And I said, no, that's not victim blaming. That's just describing what's going on. And they said, oh no, that lets the abusers off the hook. It's like, no, that's not the point. That's the point is that's why it can be so hard for victims to leave because they're in a trauma bond. That doesn't excuse anything the abusive person's doing. But anyway, so when someone's in a trauma bond in a relationship where they're being narcissistically abused, coercively controlled, that is just like a war. It is a battle. And just like you can get PTSD from war, you can get CPTSD from an abusive relationship. You can get CPTSD from a war too, by the way. And that's when it doesn't go away right away. It takes some time to heal it. A lot of times people need to go to EMDR or they'll go to brain spotting or whatever it is. I don't care what works for people as long as it works. And usually the first thing is to go no contact from that abusive person because it's very difficult to even begin the process of getting better when you're still involved with them, when you're still in their presence. It just makes it a lot harder. It's one of the reasons why co-parenting with a narcissist after a divorce is so difficult. That's why they call it counter-parenting. But it's a whole process healing that trauma bond. I call it unsubscribing from the narcissist's distorted version of reality. And breaking all contact is one of the great ways to do it.
The case is over and done, and it doesn't get reopened.
And then just lastly, and probably not an easy question but I just look at their marriage and like they had dated, it seemed, for a couple of years. And then they moved to Virginia. And according to the documents, they were together for 8 months before they separated. And then they're divorced a couple of years later. Like, what is it about when people get married that you can go from everything seems to be fine and perfect, and then 8 months later, things aren't going well, and then suddenly you're divorced? Like, what do you see in something like this when you just look at that timeline about what could have gone wrong with this marriage to make them so incompatible?
They say we're attorneys at law and counselors at law, but I don't even know that the best psychologists or psychiatrists can answer that.
Yeah.
I think there are a whole bunch of issues that go on. I had a judge friend of mine that used to say that opposites attract.
Well, we went over this, right? We went over why they could have been so incompatible. It's because if he's an abusive person, a narcissistic person, he's going to go through the cycle of abuse: love, bomb, devalue, discard, hoover. And in a extreme way, this double homicide is a form of a hoover, technically, as what's by pure definition, you can consider it a hoover. A hoover is when you try to get someone back under your control and you reach out to them. They call it a hoover. Well, this is one way to get them back under control. A final solution, as they might say.
And then they attack. You get comfortable, and all of a sudden when you're married, and a psychologist would have a field day with this. You start taking each other for granted. You start expecting things. You don't recognize what you do. You don't feel like you need to please the other one as much because they're already trapped or committed or stuck or contracted to you. So marriage, once you sign that paperwork, life is different. And one of the saddest things I hear every now and then is, I knew when we got married, it was a mistake. but I'd already committed to it. I promised God, I promised my family, I promised my friends, and you stay with it, and then you know it's going to end. But yeah, I think relationships change a lot when you get married.
And someone mentioned this in the chat, right? Someone had a bad feeling about their marriage, but they'd already spent all this money and told all the family, and they didn't want to have to go through the process of unraveling it, and they had a little bit of people pleaser in them. And then that case that the commenter was talking about, they ended up getting divorced 2 years after the marriage. So I would say, yeah, it sucks if you have that feeling after the engagement and you've spent money and you've told family and friends. Yeah, it sucks. But it would suck even more to go through with it and then just have to end it later. So again, I totally get why someone would be a little hesitant, because it's going to be uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable and embarrassing. Okay, I know we said we were getting married and we spent this money, but I'm going to back out. I'm not feeling it, and I'm going to do what's best for me. And honestly, the people that truly care about you and love you and are on your team, they'll understand. The people that maybe aren't on your team and maybe aren't in your corner, they're the people that maybe wouldn't understand. And so even doing something like that, it can show you who your real friends are.
Even if you're living together and have kids and you become married, there are a whole bunch of different, pulls and tugs and obligations that happen that can make things in life harder.
Yeah, and we'll see the details on this case will come out as time goes on. But a little bit of detail that we're getting here from these divorce documents, just an incredibly sad case. Randy Kessler, family law attorney, thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we go, I want to show you the statement that the Tepe family released on the day of McKee's arrest, which came roughly 9 or 10 days after the couple was found dead. Quote, "Today's arrest represents an important step toward justice for..."
I don't think we've even heard this statement yet, but let's see what they say.
"Monique and Spencer. Nothing can undo the devastating loss of 2 lives taken far too soon, but we are grateful to the City of Columbus Police Department, its investigators, and assisting law enforcement community whose tireless efforts helped to capture the person involved. We thank the community for the continued support, prayers, and compassion shown throughout this tragedy. And as the case proceeds, we trust the justice system to hold the person responsible fully accountable. Monique and Spencer remain at the center of our hearts, and we carry forward their love as we surround and protect the 2 children they leave behind. We will continue to honor their lives and the light they brought into this world." The Tepes leave behind those 2 children, ages 4 and 1 years old. They are in the care of family right now. There is a GoFundMe page that has raised more than $200,000 at this point.
Holy mackerel. Good for them now. I'm glad the people are donating to a good cause here.
And those children, again, unharmed on the night that all of this happened, but move forward living without their parents. That will do it for On the Case, presented by... Imagine the person you once knew as a neighbor became an alleged killer.
When he showed me the mugshot, I said, "Oh my God, I know this man." And matter of fact, I got a little chills now thinking about it.
That is one.
She was on Ashley too. But this will be the last video of the night here.
Of the Chicago neighbors of the surgeon who allegedly killed his ex-wife and her husband hours away in Columbus, Ohio. Michael McKee is no longer wearing scrubs. He's in a prison jumpsuit, and he will soon be in Ohio to face charges that not only did he shoot Monique.
That's what they say, Kat, right? Narcissists don't change. They just change who their target is.
Monique and Spencer Tepe dead inside their home, but he plotted to do it before the shots were fired. We're On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, real quick before we start this episode of On the Case, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion. To think that I would know if my neighbors were capable of doing something as horrific as what Michael McKee is accused of doing to Spencer and Monique Tepe. But the truth is, oftentimes in these stories, it's hard to know who the people are amongst us who actually could do.
And that's a question I get asked a lot too. Can narcissists change? And I would say you have to see it in black and white. Like once you feel like they're a narcissistic person, and when you put it through the lens of is everything they're doing about power and control and managing their image, narcissistic supply, and avoiding accountability, it is best to see it in black and white, especially at first. And if that's the case, and you put them in that box, I have never seen one that I've put in that box truly change. Now, can there be exceptions? I'll never say anything's impossible, but the only time I would ever even tell someone to consider it is if it's maybe like a very less severe version, maybe, and maybe there's substances that were involved and they got clean. Maybe then, maybe, but usually not. And you would also have to look for, did they actually do any footwork to change? And most of them don't, because most of them can't truly take accountability and they can't get honest about what's going on, and they can't admit they have a problem because they don't think they're the problem. They think someone else is always the problem. So most narcissists, they never even begin the process of change. So you don't even need to worry about it. They didn't begin. So that's how you know they didn't. Another way you know they didn't change is if you have boundaries and they continue to disrespect your boundaries or go around your boundaries to talk to you. That is not the sign of someone that respects you. That is the sign of someone who is entitled and selfish and wants to do what they want and thinks they can treat you however they want, regardless of how you feel about it. So that's why I say, I made a video about this. I just posted today. See them in black and white, especially in the beginning. It'll do you good.
Something like what he allegedly did.
And last summer, I met him. He was a new resident, and I introduced myself to him, and he was a very pleasant man.
And there are people in a building in Chicago right now that are kind of going through their mind, rethinking all the interactions they had with Michael McKee. The woman I spoke with today, she spoke with Michael McKee at a pool last summer in Chicago. Her name is Geraldine Kolarek, and she was a neighbor of Michael McKee. She often passed him in the hallway, and she now is coming to grips with the reality of who she was living near, a man who is currently shackled, facing charges of murdering Spencer and Monique Tepe. Now, Geraldine shared us these images here from the building where she lived with Michael McKee up until his arrest. This is a luxury condo building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. And she says that there was actually a police officer outside of McKee's apartment on the 12th floor after his arrest. And she saw law enforcement in the building searching through McKee's apartment after he was taken into custody. Now, I'll have more on whether she noticed any sort of red flags about Michael McKee up until his arrest. But before we get into that, I want to talk about what we know about him to this point, because there are certainly things that have been reported and are clear, like that he was once married to Monique Tepe, and then they divorced before she met Spencer Tepe, and then had 2 children with him, and they moved on with their lives. But Michael McKee, what was he doing? Where did he come from? We did some digging. So let's start with where he grew up, which is Zanesville, Ohio, population roughly 25,000. It's about an hour east of Columbus, and that's where he went.
It's like that 70s show. Ohio, Ohio, Ohio.
To college at Ohio State, and where he presumably met Monique. Now, before he became an Ohio State Buckeye, it does appear that he was pretty accomplished coming out of high school. The Zanesville Times Recorder, the local paper there in Zanesville, his hometown, says that he was honorable mention All-State in football his senior year, and he graduated 5th in his class. Now, this is a guy who had a lot of stuff going for him, it seems. After high school, he stayed close to home. He goes to Ohio State for undergrad. It's unclear when he and Monique started dating, but we did find images of them as early as 2013. Here they are with some friends going to a water park. Now, Monique is from Westerville, Ohio. That's about 20 minutes north of Columbus. And she went to school for early childhood education. And she also was 39 years old. She graduated college roughly in 2010. Now, McKee graduates.
On a side note, a lot of female teachers wind up with narcissistic guys. And I think that's because there's a lot of narcissistic guys that try to turn their romantic partners into their mother. So they see the teacher woman, especially like early, whatever age group she teaches, and it kind of matches a lot of what they want a lot of times. Right. And so I've seen that a lot. I've known a lot of women teachers that wind up with narcissistic guys.
OSU's College of Medicine in 2014. To be a doctor, specifically a vascular surgeon, you got to go to school for a long time. Now, the first step after graduating med school in 2014 and becoming a surgeon is you move on to a residency. And in that case, it appears that he started that around 2015 in Virginia. Now, he and Monique married in 2015. This is a picture from their wedding day. And then after they were married, the couple moved together to Virginia. Again, the path to becoming a surgeon, it's not an easy one. You do 4 years of undergrad, then 4 years of med school. So that's 8 years. And then you continue on to residency for several years after that. Michael did his at a clinic in Roanoke, Virginia. And he finished that residency after 5 years, graduating in 2020. Now,
even amongst twins, though, it is still a lottery. It's not like going to be identical completely.
During his time in Virginia, that is when the marriage with Monique fell apart and the couple divorced in 2017, just roughly 2 years after they were married. Now, we have the divorce documents that show that the couple ended up divorcing, and at the time of the divorce, which played out in Ohio court, Monique was living back, it appears, at home in Ohio, and then Michael was still in Virginia doing his residency, and Monique was awarded the divorce according to documents, because of incompatibility. Now, Monique was living back in Ohio at the time of that divorce, and then Michael, as part of this divorce, was awarded the home that the couple lived in Virginia. But as far as, what that incompatibility means, what really was that? This was a couple that got, appeared to have dated for a couple of years before getting married, and then they reach a point 2 years in where things just aren't going well. None of that has officially been reported as of yet. There's obviously a lot of internet rumors that are out there right now. After the divorce, Monique moves on with her life. She stays in Ohio, and eventually she meets a dentist named Spencer Tepe. The two of them met online, and they just built a beautiful life together. They end up getting married in 2020, and then there's that wedding video that everyone has seen at this point, shot by Spencer's brother-in-law of a celebration in 2021. And then this couple goes on to have 2 children, and their ages 4 and 1. Now, while that was going on and Monique was moving on with her life, Michael continued his training to become a vascular surgeon. He completes a fellowship at the University of Maryland, and he wrapped that up in 2022. Now, we know that right now, McKee does have active licenses to be a surgeon in Illinois, where he was living at the time of his arrest, as well as California. And it also appears that he spent time working at a facility in Nevada. There's a local television station, 8 News Now, in Las Vegas, that says he worked for a group called Las Vegas Surgical Associates. It's a group with multiple offices in Nevada. It offers a wide range of procedures. The TV station also says that McKee's license in Nevada expired last year, and the station also says that it has documents that show that McKee was named in a medical malpractice lawsuit in 2023, and it was a suit that was brought against multiple medical professionals. Now, at the time of his arrest, McKee was working for OSF.
That is interesting. I heard someone else say that before too. So he was in a lawsuit, but it also targeted other medical professionals. So I wonder what that was all about.
St. Anthony Medical Center in Rockford, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half west of Chicago. The healthcare group released a statement to local media in the wake of the arrest of one of their surgeons that reads, quote, OSF is cooperating with authorities who will provide further information. All questions should be directed to law enforcement authorities. Now, McKee had a long commute for his job, it seems. Lived in a nice place, though, in Chicago, in Lincoln Park. That's a really nice neighborhood. And the address listed on his documents is this luxury condo building called the Pierre in Lincoln Park. And again, we spoke to one of his neighbors, and we'll hear what she had to say about some interaction she had with McKee in just a moment. What's not clear at this point, there's a lot that's still not clear at this point. Why would Michael McKee, this accomplished surgeon, someone who went to school for like 15 years to get this job, probably made a pretty good amount of money to live in this nice luxury apartment building, why would he allegedly drive to Columbus, Ohio, roughly 6 hours away, and kill his ex-wife and her husband? And why would he do it roughly a decade after his divorce from Monique was finalized? Why would he do it in the days after Christmas and just a day before New Year's Eve? Now, police do allege that McKee drove from Illinois, that's roughly 6 hours, to Columbus to kill Spencer and Monique. Columbus police say that they allegedly spotted McKee on video surveillance in the area of the Tepes on the night of their murder. Now, here's that person of interest video that was released prior to McKee's arrest of just someone who was in the area that police just found suspicious. And according to police documents, police say that they followed that person of interest on surveillance video to a vehicle. And they say the Tepes were killed between 2 and 5 in the morning on December 30th inside their home in Columbus.
3:52 a.m.
And police say a vehicle arrived in Columbus shortly before the Tepes were killed, and then it left the area shortly after. McKee was arrested overnight between Friday and Saturday. That's roughly used. This is McKee entering court in Rockford, Illinois on Monday. His hearing lasted less than 3 minutes. He waived his right to extradition, so that means he is set to return to Ohio to face charges that he committed this terrible crime. And we also know that Chicago police executed a search warrant at his home at that luxury condo building, the Pierre in Lincoln Park. And this is video that his neighbor took of police at the condo. His neighbor's name is Geraldine Kollerick, and she is actually a true crime writer, if you can believe it. She's written multiple books about people like serial killers, and yet she's now dealing with the reality that she was a neighbor to Michael McKee. We spoke with her earlier today.
Geraldine, how did you know Michael McKee?
I knew Michael McKee because here at the Pierre, we have a pool and we have a barbecue pit upstairs. And last summer, I met him. He was a new resident, and I introduced myself to him, and he was a very pleasant man. We didn't discuss about jobs or anything like that. I just told him about the building and how nice it was, and welcome to the Pierre. And the Air and Water Show is the best place to see it in the city because they come right in front of us. And it was just very nice, very pleasant. And we would.
Yes, I am Judge Jared, and my pronouns are Your Honor.
Pass each other, coming into the building and the elevator. And, I even forgot his name, I'll be honest. And I would say hi, and he'd say hi. And I'd say, wow, we're tired, long day. And he'd, yep, long day. We never had any other conversations after that. And I didn't know that he was the.
And I've made videos about the 3 ways a narcissist will apologize. Well, first and foremost, it's rare. It's rare they'll say sorry, but it does happen that they'll say sorry. It doesn't mean they'll mean it, but they'll say sorry. They'll say sorry to manipulate. They'll know a well-placed sorry can be very manipulative, but they'll say, I'm sorry you feel that way, because that doesn't take any accountability for their actions or what they did. Or sorry, that wasn't my intention. Sometimes that can be part of a good apology, but the way the narcissist does it, it's just a way to put it on you and not take any accountability. Or 3, I'm sorry, but. And usually the I'm sorry, but will blame you for something, etc. Now, if you ask them specifically what they're sorry for, they're not going to be able to answer that. They're going to squirm, blame you, blame someone else, anything but take accountability. And as always, the best apology is changed behavior. If you don't change the behavior, it's not really a genuine apology. And you should also show remorse for what you've done too. That's also a thing. But I think it's most important to change the behavior.
Suspect until last Saturday, my doorman told me that Channel 7 was outside there, and he knew that I used to work for Channel 7. So I came out, and the reporter said that they've been trying to talk to other residents and everything about Michael McKee. And I said, well, I don't know if I know him or not. Show me a picture. And when he showed me the mugshot, I said, oh my God, I know this man. And matter of fact, I got a little chills now thinking about it. And you know what, it's, it was a shock to me. And then the building put out a memo to all the residents that there's going to be police presence in the building because of one of the residents. And that really got people asking. And since I am a true crime writer and everything like that, and people know that I've had 3 best-selling true crime books, I started getting texts from people.
Sort of like a poetic justice almost, or what would you call it? An ironic twist of fate that the true crime writer had a murderer in her midst, or someone who is about to commit a murder? Sweet irony is that what they would call it?
Saying, what's happening? What's happening? And people were nervous. And I'm still news inside me. So I went upstairs, and Lord and behold, I saw a police officer sitting outside his door. He's got 24 hours police officers outside his condo, and he lives only 2 floors above me. And I took video of them there. I just did it, and I took a video of the door too. And then the next day, I went into my garage, and Lord and behold, there's a crime lab band from Ohio. And I walked upstairs, and sure enough, I saw police there, and I met the officer who was the head of the investigation, and they were taking stuff out of his apartment and putting stuff into boxes.
And for someone, I mean, you've covered true crime, you've written about true crime, and in, you cover this genre, you talk about people who had double lives a lot of times. And here's someone who you met with in, a pool. Summertime Chicago is incredible. And then you have that juxtaposition and just that moment where you see, I mean, what was the difference like between what you saw in his eyes when you're meeting with him and chatting, and then you see that mugshot with that serious look on his face?
That something really triggered this man. Why I'm thinking to myself,
nope, I don't agree with that. It doesn't have to be any trigger. It can just be the fact that they are a narcissist and they lost control. That's it. That was the trigger. If you want to say there was a trigger, the losing of control. That's it. And then you can nurse and nurture your own resentment, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And he probably gets a perverse satisfaction from doing it. People who don't understand psychology and personality disorders, they think, it must have been a trigger. It must have been something he's seen that made him act this way. No, it's not necessary.
Why would somebody with a successful vascular surgeon career and everything like that divorce from somebody 10 years that would be at that breaking point? Something triggered him. Such obsession, such pain over that divorce and over that person that led him to that. I'll be honest, Chris, when you cross that line in your mind, there's no way of turning back. And that's exactly what it is on the killers that I've covered and so on. It's an obsession and jealousy and love that leads them to do crazy things. Like Larry Eiler, homosexual serial killer. Every time his lover cheated on him, he would go out, he would pick up a victim and kill them and put them as a substitute for his rage.
And so basically what a narcissistic person is saying is, if I can't be with you, no one can. And that's the ultimate culmination of it, right? If I can't be with you, you will not even be alive, and your husband won't be alive, and my life will be over. But I guess I just don't care. I don't care. Yes, I have so many things going for me, but I'm just that caught up in my own ridiculousness that this is what I'm going to do. Really absurd when you think about it, right?
Jealousy. And that's probably what was festering in his mind. He just could not get over this woman. Something triggered this in this man. Something triggered him. And he just had to take it out, that he just had to do the worst thing that he could think of doing. And, like most people who do things like this, they don't think they're ever going to be caught. But now you've got all this electronic stuff, and no one thinks that a Ring camera is going to show you walking away or show your car. Nobody thinks of that. This has never happened 20 years ago. And I think that it's circumstantial evidence now. And I think that why the police were there, they're looking for things. They're looking for shoes that would maybe match the thread in the snow. They're looking for maybe any kind of fibers from the carpet, things like that would do it. And notes, maybe he had a diary, things like that. You know, maybe her pictures are all over the.
And again, we don't know what the cops found and what the DA has. They might even have a murder weapon for all we know. They just didn't announce it. The same can be true of the Nick Reiner case. They might have all sorts of evidence that we just don't know about. In fact, it's very likely they do.
Apartment. Who knows? You know what I mean? Who knows what makes people go over the edge? But, you know, jealousy and love gone wrong, that is always one of the biggest things in domestic violence.
And when you saw him, and I know it was a very brief interaction and maybe you're passing in the hallway, but you know, we're all trying to learn more about who he was kind of as a person and what red flags might have been out there. Did you ever see him with anyone? Did he have friends over?
No, I never saw him with anyone. Matter of fact, I did see him last week or the week before. We passed each other because I remember his picture. From the picture, I remember sitting in the lobby waiting to go on an assignment, waiting for a crew, and I remember him passing. And he just wasn't that sociable, I'll be honest. You know, he was a person, this is a building of a lot of professional people. And you know what, when we come home, we're not too talkative.
And there's a fair amount of psychopathic individuals that can be a lone wolf. Not all, though, right? There's communal narcissists and narcissists that are the center of attention and have all these friends, but certainly not all of them. Usually, what I've seen in the murdering variety, more of a lone wolf. But even look at a character, even though it's a movie, Patrick Bateman, he had the appearance of having friends, but they were not real. There was no real intimacy there. There was no connection. It was all for show. It was fake. So a lot of narcissistic people have shallow and fake relationships.
We get in that elevator and so on. It's like, hi, how are you? Yeah, cold day today. Yeah, you know what I mean? And he was very much to himself, a quiet person. I am too. You know, when I get back from the assignment, I don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a shame. It's a shame because a lot of people here are like, oh my God, he lived on that 12th floor. And, you know, it was a nice apartment and he rented it. And we never think that one of our residents would do something like this. But the real victims, Chris, are the children. I cannot imagine a child, your mom and dad are here one day, and then you don't see them at all anymore in your life. That I think is worse. The 4-year-old, the newborn baby, maybe not that much, but I mean, that 4-year-old child, I really feel bad for these kids and their life now. And he's given up his entire career as a doctor. It took him 15 years to be where he's at, making a good career. Was this worth it? You know, to him, apparently it was, to get out his rage and to get out his jealousy that he had, whatever. But that's it. But I
mean, it's just stupid. Like, and again, the disorder takes them over as well. Like, that's their operating system is distorted. And so you can't talk sense to them. You can't talk sense to them. But they know what they're doing. They know. They just don't care. It's not that they're not aware. They just don't care. It's not that they don't see. They just disagree. Dr. Simon says that. And he's the author of Character Disturbance and In Sheep's Clothing. I've interviewed him twice. Check those out if you haven't seen them.
There's nothing, you never know what a person, when they pass or who you're talking to. You know what I mean? You don't know what would trigger anybody. You know, I'm talking to you now and everything. You look like a pleasant person, very nice person, but maybe something will push you over the edge and then you just can't come back anymore.
Yeah, hopefully not. I mean, I think for your building, and
generally speaking, you need to have a certain predisposition already, I think, to truly be pushed that far, unless it's extreme circumstances. And what I mean by that is maybe war, maybe there's a Holocaust of sorts, or you're in a place like that, Germany in the 1930s. Yeah, places like that can bring out those kinds of things, even without the predisposition. But for the most part, I think you got to have something going on first to be the type of person that could even be pushed that far over the edge.
And just as the days have gone by, we see him in court yesterday, and he's just, you think of, from the kids that were in the home to driving to Columbus, Ohio to allegedly do this. Like, I guess, how are you doing realizing that this person who did this, there's probably that shock of the moment that, oh my gosh, this was a national news story and here it is in our building. But I guess, what's the mood of the building, knowing that this was someone who lived, we'll see how the legal process plays out and the evidence that police have against him, but knowing that he lived alongside all of you, what is the mood of the building right now?
Right now, it's pretty jumpy. It's like the door people. It's like, because I've had all these TV crews coming to do interviews with me and so on, they're like really jumpy, like, okay, and I have residents say, why are you even talking? Why are you making a bad thing about our building and everything? Our property values are going to go down, and everything. I says, look, the reality and the truth is that a man lived here in one of our residents, and he killed 2 people. And, if the media, because the media knows me, because I wrote Free to Kill on serial killer Larry Eiler. And then I wrote I Am Kane and Prisoners of Fear, these big true crime books that are out there. And what happened is that a lot of media people know who I am. So I get the phone calls. I mean, when Channel 2 saw me on Channel 7, I got a call right away from one of my guys saying, Jer, we interviewed you last year on Eiler because of the DNA story that about unidentified victims and how I convinced a coroner to not bury these bodies, but use DNA. And last year we identified and returned 3 boys home. They know who I am, so they come to me. But some of the residents are very angry that I'm speaking out, and some of the management people. But, like they say, you could only do the interviews in your apartment. So what I'm doing is, if you want to talk to me, you got to talk to me outside or do by Zoom. But I think that I'm not afraid. No resident wanted to talk, but it's just so kinky winky, Chris, that out of all the residents, I met this guy. And when I saw the picture, I realized who he was. And, but I even forgot his name. We would just pass each other. Boom, hi, how are you? Because I knew who he looked like. He knew what I looked like. He didn't say hi, Geraldine, or anything like that. But, it's a little iffy here now that they passed out the thing about the police coming to the apartments. And I've asked some neighbors that lived on 12 what's happening, and they looked at me. I had my friend Ron looked at me and he says, I don't know. I don't want to ask Jer. I don't want to ask. I don't want to know. What I don't know won't hurt me. And that's the feeling, that they don't want to get involved.
Geraldine, last question for you. Just as a journalist, someone who covers true crime, who's covered really tough cases about really bad people, and he's alleged to be one of those people right now. I mean, if you were to sit down with him, knowing that to an extent you knew him, you've had conversations without knowing that this was going on allegedly in his mind. I mean, what would you ask him?
I would say to him, Mike, what were you going through in your mind that would lead you to this? What are your regrets now, having done this?
It always reminds me what Michael Moore asked of Marilyn Manson after the Columbine shootings, because many moons ago, people were blaming people like Marilyn Manson for that shooting. And Michael Moore asked him, and they kind of took it out of context, but I like it better taken out of context in this case. But Michael Moore asked Marilyn Manson, what would you say to the Columbine shooters? And he said, I wouldn't say a word. He said, I would listen to what they had to say.
What are the ramifications? And you know what? I really feel inside of me, and I'm not, me as a person, I think that he may even try to commit suicide in jail. That's a thought of mine too, because being such a professional person and then realizing the consequences now of his actions, and very intelligent, how this is going to go over and over in his mind. Why did I do what I did? You know what I mean? And he's going to be very depressed and everything that goes along with this. He's not
bold of her to assume that's even going through his mind. I mean, part of a lack of empathy is not thinking like normal people, not thinking about, I feel really bad about what I did back there. Instead, he's probably thinking, oh, God damn it, I'm in freaking jail now. I'm going to have to freaking face maybe the death penalty. He's probably not thinking much about them at all. He might have a grim sense of satisfaction that they're gone, but now he's not thinking, oh, I feel so bad for their kids. I feel bad for their friends and family. Nah, that's probably not going into the equation at all. It's like you got to understand pathological people. That impaired empathy piece, and in his case, probably more of a complete lack of empathy, that distorts the lens. It distorts the lens and it distorts how they see things. He's not thinking about that. She's thinking like, oh, this is what I would be thinking and feeling if I did something like that. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works. He's in his own version of things. He's thinking, damn it. He's thinking about himself. And he's probably thinking, how can I get the least consequences? I mean, he's pretty much toast, though. I mean, he's probably going to get life without the possibility of parole if convicted. I'd be shocked if there's much of a chance of parole, honestly. So he won't see the light of day ever. Or if he does, he'd be 80 or more at that point. Because he's 39 now.
Your typical Larry Eiler killer, okay? That's living out the fantasies. I mean, a lot of the killers, as we know, Chris, live out their fantasies. But when you do something like this and it's an obsession, then probably you'll have an obsession about how you destroyed your life. That's the consequences that may happen. I hope not. But I mean, he's also up for the death penalty. You got to realize that. So aggravated murder means death penalty in Ohio, where it doesn't mean it in Illinois. So now this may be it, or this may be his way to say, now that I'm going to be convicted and everything, I'm going to seek the death penalty because it's the only way to end my pain. So we'll see how this goes and everything, but.
And in a grim way, I mean, if he just kills himself after this, then he doesn't give all the creators something to talk about. Like maybe people would still be examining the thing or whatever, but the fact that he didn't do that leaves the door open for tons of coverage. So it just is. You can think what you want about that, but that's just reality.
I never was afraid of him. I never thought anything weird or unusual. He was just another resident. It's somebody that I met up at the pool. You know what I mean? And we'd pass each other and we'd say, hi, how are you? Fine. Or I would say, boy, I'm exhausted. And sometimes he would say, I am too. And, that was it. And I would get off on my 10th floor and he'd get off on 12. So, it's a shame. It's a shame for everybody around, but the children are the ones that will be the real victims of this whole case.
Yeah, no, very well put. Well, Geraldine, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
So here's the statement that the Tepe family released on the day of the McKee's arrest. Quote, today's arrest represents an important step toward justice for Monique and Spencer. Nothing can undo the devastating loss of two lives taken far
He played this before too.
Too soon, but we are grateful to the City of Columbus Police Department, its investigators, and assisting law enforcement community whose tireless efforts helped to capture the person involved. We thank the community for their continued support, prayers, and compassion shown throughout this tragedy. As the case proceeds, we trust the justice system to hold the person responsible fully accountable. Monique and Spencer remain at the center of our hearts, and we carry forward their love as we surround and protect the two children they leave behind. We will continue to honor their lives and the light they brought into this world. The Tepes also leave behind those two children, ages 1 and 4. There is a GoFundMe that has raised more than $210,000. Those children were unharmed.
on the night that their parents were killed. But of course, they are now dealing with the reality that their parents are no longer here. They are currently
physically unharmed, mentally never the same again. That's what I would say about that. Gotta have a wild life. It's going to be a wild life for them, honestly. I think he's in Illinois. He's in Illinois, and I think he's got to be extradited back to Ohio, is what I believe. Yes, indeed, Ellie. But I will say, innocent until proven guilty, but it's not looking too good for him. Too many pieces of the puzzle add up here, we'll say. But all right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining another good stream here. I'll figure out. I made it. I'm fading, but I made it. We'll have to figure out what I'll talk about tomorrow. I will talk about the ICE shooting one more time, I think, before it leaves the news. And then we'll take it from there. And other people sending me other things to go over. Maybe the Alan Jackson interview. I started watching some of that. The first 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, he says in the beginning, I can't tell you anything that I didn't say already. So I don't know what the rest of it's going to show. But thank you very much, everyone, for being in the chat. Brian, Kat, Jimmy. Thank you for Jimmy. To Jimmy for modding. Everyone give Jimmy a thank you. And tomorrow I'll be uploading the Connor Beaton interview. I'm still trying to figure out if I should do an introduction to it or just hop right in. When I do introductions, people leave and don't watch. Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Danielle and George and Ellie and everyone else. Brian. Tony. No way. Heather. Jim. Is it Amina? Hot ham. Great chat. Got a great chat of flock of black sheep here. I love it. So with that, and the finisher, can't forget you. So get some sleep over there, Kat. I don't know when you sleep, but I appreciate you being here. And to thrive, thank you very much. What a great way to end it. I love it. All right. And yes, thanks to Jimmy for modding. And I'll be back again tomorrow night.